have not seen that face-to-face policing in a long while, in a very long while, until last week. A young officer, black officer, came by my stoop. I was sitting out, gave me his card. His name is Reggie Ballard, is his name, right? And he sat and he talked to me. We just talked. And see, now I know his name and face, and he knows my name and face. You see? And I'm gonna tell you something. That is how it should be.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello again, welcome to possibly the most exciting episode of this season. It's Middle Ground. One of only 2 episodes in the whole of the show to be nominated for an Emmy, so I think that says something about The Wire, even if it does sometimes feel like the lack of awards are a bit unjustified. Toby, you looking forward to this week?
Yeah, man, this is really worthy of the Emmy that it was nominated for, and should have won. But yeah, just every scene is just so golden. There's just not really a dull moment at all. Everything's really coming to a head, and yeah, I'm just really looking forward to diving into it.
Excellent. Yeah, it's quite it's a very important episode, and I think you're right. It is. I mean, it's one of my favourite episodes, so
yeah,
I'm going to be looking forward to really delving into this one.
It's just scene after scene of memorable moments. There's nothing that wouldn't really stay with you, I think, in an episode like this. So, yeah, really, really good.
Before we get going, let's have a little peek inside Listener's Corner, where we've had a couple of messages. We did hear from Damon, who was just mentioning a couple of parts. He talks about the Marlowe shooting last week, where he had killed Devon. And he says, as described by Vernon Holly when he tells Keema and Marlowe earlier in the season, I don't necessarily think it was personal so much as sending a message with his signature. So he thinks that it may have just been like an older signature move that Marlowe may have used before.
Because that is very true. It's weird. I remember registering that when I watched that scene. I think it is early in this season, where Vernon says, he shot 1 in the mouth, 2 in the tits. I'm pretty sure he says those exact words. And for some reason, I just never make the connection when it comes around later on. So it's very good that we were caught up on that, because that's a very, very blatant connection, really. And I just find it odd that that signature doesn't really play into any more of Marlowe. Like, I can't remember in season 4 or 5 any time where that comes up, and it's from here on out very much Kristen Snoop's domain, and the nail gun that really becomes the signature, I guess. So
yeah, I guess it moves on a little bit more, and as he gains more power in his empire, he doesn't have to do as much of the dirty work.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was the same with Avon. That's why when he comes back, he starts. It's almost like he's hunting for the glory days where he used to get involved in the action, because now that he may know somewhat that things have shrunk a little bit, to bring them back up, he feels like he needs to take a step into the front again.
Yeah.
So that's probably the way that it used to be for him, and maybe Marlowe was similar. And as things went along, his signature was no longer necessary, as he wasn't doing that kind of work himself.
Yeah, definitely. I just can't help but feel like it's one of the things that wasn't quite properly laid out in the same way that his sort of street name was established as Black, wasn't it, for the first 3 episodes? Yeah. And then it completely becomes Marlowe, like there's just no alternative. But I guess that could also speak to just Marlowe wanting to be the ultimate figure of authority on the street and doesn't need any nicknames. He is
especially
who
seeing
he
as
is.
how much he values his name.
Yeah, exactly. My name is my name.
But yeah, thanks for that, Damon. That's a good point, because it's very, very subtly introduced. I think you're right. It does also mention it, because last week we were wondering whether it was his dad was in that other scene with Carcetti and Teresa. And he confirms that they was. They actually shot all those scenes on the same night, he says, for separate episodes.
Yeah, that's really cool, because Tommy's in such a different place, as is Terry in those scenes, like so much time has passed and they're so much more towards their campaign. So it must have been quite difficult to, as an actor, to get into the character shift in the space of a couple of minutes, sort of fast forwarding a lot. So yeah, it's quite interesting to hear how all that logistics works.
Well, it's probably a couple of hours. I would imagine the
Yeah.
shooting takes quite a while. But he also, Damon also confirms what I was thinking last week about Freeman's little showing off his ability to read the numbers trick, which I thought was him trying to read the numbers or understand what the numbers were by looking over his shoulder whilst doing something else. Which Damon sort of agrees that it was as well. But he mentions an alternative, sort of another level to it. He says that he's basically telling Bernard that he can guess the numbers by the sound of the keys on the phone.
That's true, because
Like the tone that they make.
They all have a different dial tone, don't they?
So yeah, that's quite a nifty way of looking at it. I think that's about right, because it's certainly a clever little trick and something like that would be convincing to someone. So
Yeah.
seems reasonable to me.
No, definitely. I guess reading or being able to kind of decipher dial tones isn't necessarily the skill that Bernard needed, but it kind of establishes him as a a skilled fraudster, so to speak. I guess that's what he was looking for, some sort of credentials, and he got them with that. So it makes sense, yeah.
We had Michael email us as well. He was sending us a little link to a story that was on The Guardian about 16 members of the cast returned to Baltimore to reunite under the guise of reading stories of the city's recent riots, and it was like a sort of solidarity piece for the people there and for the city, and trying to give people a voice. Put a link to it on the blog post for this episode so you guys can see it. But yeah, it's quite a nice little article about them returning to the city and reading all of these stories about their experiences during the riots, and it was like a bit of a... They set up workshops for the residents to write about their experiences during the riots and everything. So it's like a nice little community event.
Yeah, definitely. Nice.
So that's... we also did have a gentleman named Kevin who's been contacting us quite a bit on the YouTube channel, which is good to see. He's chiming in with a few thoughts and just talking a little bit about the changes in D'Angelo and how his compassion evolves over time, and now he starts off with, he's clearly a very conflicted character, especially at the beginning. And I was saying that we do pick up his story at the point where he starts to break away from the Barksdale situation where he is a bit of a product of his environment. And I feel like we catch him at that transitionary point.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually been listening to one of the other podcasts that are going on at the moment, sort of episode by episode analysis, the Unspoiled podcast, and the host over there, Natasha, takes a very sort of controversial view that I've never heard of the character of D'Angelo. She finds him sort of not despicable, but very dislikable, very unlikable, and very stupid. Thinking that he sort of needs to learn and adapt to his environment rather than constantly trying to fight it, which I thought was certainly an interesting and unusual way of looking at it, one that I haven't heard. But yeah, it's just something that I was thinking of regarding D'Angelo. It might be worth dipping into if you guys do want to hear some other thoughts on the show, apart from
Yeah,
us.
of course. I mean, especially if it's that contrary to our usual thoughts on D'Angelo, then it'd be interesting to hear a different perspective. I would be interested to know how she sort of, why she feels that way about him.
Well, I mean, there was certainly not much empathy when that death scene came. It was kind of a triumph almost. So, it's odd, but absolutely have a little listen. It's certainly a fresh take on things.
Okay. All right, so that's all of our messages and emails for this week. Thanks very much, all of you, for getting in touch. And if there's nothing else, I guess we can move on to the recap, which I understand you're ready for, Toby.
Yeah. Okay, so Again, a nice few chunks of chapters, a few short ones, a few more meaty ones. All of them are fairly balanced. We got Omar, we got the politics, which is very long this week for once. We got the Barksdales, we got the Bubbles, we got Cutty, and we got the Major Cases unit. And to finish things off, I put sort of Stringer's Fate, the final 5 minutes at the end, so we can discuss it as it should be discussed, really. No Stamfield crew this week, which is interesting. They're certainly staying undercover for the moment, and they'll be striking, I imagine, next episode. But just absolutely every scene golden, and I particularly like how this episode starts delivering on the Carcetti storyline, who's been very much a lone wolf, separate character throughout this season, and now he's finally found a way to intertwine with lots of other of the plots going on, and that was really satisfying. So it wasn't just all the great scenes; it was also the fact that the show is finding a way to make itself more cohesive. I think this episode really did step up in terms of that.
Yeah, I think what makes it such a brilliant episode is how well... I mean, obviously we understand the presentation of The Wire, and it does jump between a lot of these stories quite a lot, but here it's a very, very tight execution, and all of the connecting parts between the scenes make perfect sense. And the way that the whole network of characters, especially when it comes to the scenes with Freamon dealing with the actual wiretap itself, the way it connects all of the scenes and action together is just really, really nicely done. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll be diving into some of that, but let's kick things off as the episode does with Omar. There's just one scene for Omar this time, so it's Brother Mouzone, and he's catching up with Omar on his way home. The two have a tense standoff and discuss how Mouzone found Omar and their capabilities and weapons. Mouzone assures Omar that Dante is still alive and did not give him up easily. Eventually, Mouzone puts up his weapon and tells Omar that he has something to ask him. So, following on almost immediately from where we left last week, with Mouzone knocking out Dante, and we assume that led to this meet that we see now. A scene of perhaps pure ridiculousness in some people's views. They're sort of throwing stilted poetry at each other in the style of a Mexican standoff. And the show is really milking the moment as well. It's really using the weather and the surrounding environment in an uncharacteristically heavy-handed way, I think, for the show, with all the passing train horns and the heavy rain and the really sort of misty night. So the abandoned industrial landscape. So it really is really milking this moment for all it's worth.
I mean, I've said it already several times, but I'll say it again. It was like a comic book film. That's when I just think of comic books when I see these two characters, like mostly in like a good way, but in this scene, I mean, for such a great episode, it is a little bit jarring compared to the rest of it, when, especially like you say, all this poetry, and some of it is a bit cringy when Omar says something like, "Oh, worrying about you, be worrying about the sun if the sun don't come up." I mean, that's pretty lame.
Yeah.
And then they start discussing their guns.
Even if I miss, I can't miss. Yeah, it's just. We should have been in the tautology video, by the way, but I don't think it was.
But yeah, it's. I suppose it's not. It's technically not a tautology, is
Probably
it? Probably
not. No.
But yeah, it's a slightly ridiculous scene. I think it's very jarring against the rest of the episode, but because it is right at the beginning and it is just this one scene, it kind of gets away with it, and it is a bit of fun. But I don't know. I do sometimes feel like I could do without the how heavy-handed it is, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, it would be absolutely hilarious if they kind of decided to put this scene in sort of the last quarter, building up to all the big climaxes. You just get this moment between Omar and Mouzone. So it's very good that they kept it separate before the credits.
They still have a slightly silly bit at the end.
Yeah.
The actual final bit is okay.
Mm.
But when you see them outside the actual property itself, and they're like stood there just right in the middle of the street, and they look totally out of place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very odd, and keeping one in the chamber if he's pondering, but he admires a man with confidence. So it's just kind of
it's just a load of one-liners, and pregnant pauses, and
absolutely
overly sort of purple prose kind of speech.
They do kind of compare the strengths of their guns a little bit, and I like I think Mouzone uses the Bond gun, right? The Walther PPK.
Mm.
And I don't know. What I was thinking during this scene, that it kind of challenges, or at least adds to your theory, or whose theory was it? Someone had a theory that Mouzone may be just a fictional figment of imagination character.
I mentioned that last week.
That was you, wasn't it? Yeah.
You'd have to tweak the script a little bit, but I think if you just changed it a little bit, you could have it so that he was just a figment of Omar's imagination.
Yeah,
That he only thinks that he's been called there to like control and look after the towers or whatever. Like, it could be done, but you'd have to get rid of all the bits with like cheese, and so it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a silly idea, to be honest.
I suppose so. I think if you could keep it between Stringer and Omar.
But then it's between two characters arbitrarily. It has to be like one character,
Yeah.
otherwise it's a bit weird. If it's a character that two sort of unrelated people can see, I mean, obviously they know one another, and he's trying to kill him and everything, but it wouldn't make much sense for those two characters just to be able to see him. So that would just be taking it at a stretch. It's already stretching it a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, otherwise, I guess what the scene ultimately achieves is a very grim sentence over Stringer's head, as if he hasn't had enough of them recently. Just a nice way to set up the episode for us, I guess, and kind of create something that mirrors the ending. But yeah, overall, a very interesting scene.
Uncharacteristic of the rest of the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we delve into the rest of it then?
Yep.
Where normality takes over. All right, and we'll kick things off with the politics. So there are 5 parts to the politics this week. So at the police department, Deputy Commissioner Rule suggests that they could sidestep major political fallout from Hamsterdam if they close it down now. Major Reed checks with the SWAT team commander that they are ready and asks what City Hall are waiting for, prompting Acting Commissioner Irvin Burrell to phone the mayor's office. So
Right, so a very short bit there with yes, they're having a conversation about finding. They've obviously found out about Hamsterdam, and now they're getting ready to shut it all down again. So
Yeah.
there's just a load of, like we say, we're just seeing a continuation of them trying to protect themselves, and the fact that Hamsterdam is an unthinkable concept. Although, like you say, Rules still does seem to be slightly. Still does seem to be slightly amused. He doesn't seem to be taking it quite as seriously as Burrell. He was coming under a lot of pressure as a result of this.
Yeah. Burrell's a bit more tied up in the politics than anyone else, which is to his disadvantage, really. And we see that whilst Colvin was thrown out very swiftly last week, they are actually considering keeping it going, heavily riding on some of the things that Colvin said. Obviously, this is not through Colvin's noble intentions, but it is to try and paint it as something other than drug sort of legalization. So, to some extent, it's caused some unplanned goodness here, as it causes the city's politicians to genuinely consider endorsing the idea. So, it certainly gets everyone's panties in a twist.
And we see a little bit more of that in what I assume will be the next bit, where we see Royce himself trying to find the very title of our episode, The Middle Ground.
Yeah, definitely. But quickly before we go, though, I just wanted to mention there's a kind of a police officer, a uniformed officer, actually beyond uniform, he's wearing some more senior clothing, who comes over and reports on how they've shut down all the, they're ready to shut down all the zones and toss everyone into wagons. And I believe he is looking like he's the head of the SWAT team. And of course, this is the same guy that was the SWAT member we've seen on occasions in season 1 and 2.
Oh yeah.
And he's clearly now been promoted to the kind of commander of the SWAT, which is a really cool little detail. Ironically, his job is still nothing but throwing people into the back of vans indiscriminately by the looks of it. But I thought that was a nice little detail, because he's popped up 3 or 4 times throughout the first 2 seasons. He was there when they were going to bust Avon out of the Orlando's club. He was there after the kid got shot by the stray bullet, when they were sort of going through the ghettos and making arrests. So yeah, I like the fact that we're seeing these mini progressions.
Yeah, that is a very minor one, but it's a good spot, because we haven't seen him, barely at all. He really is one of those characters that pops up every 6 or 7 episodes or something.
Yeah.
Once a season, maybe.
Less than that, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I thought that was a nice little spot. That's kind of why I isolated this section, really, because there was a fair bit to say. But now we will move to Royce, where he and his chief of staff, Coleman Parker, are in a meeting with their health commissioner, a public health academic, and state delegate Odell Watkins. Burrell is left on hold, and when the mayor does speak to him, he tells him that the police are not to do anything as the mayor's office regroups and rethinks the situation. Rawls then asks Irvin to explain the mayor's meaning, and Burrell claims Royce is stalling as an attempt to put the police department in the guillotine. Burrell believes that Royce is planning how to distance himself, to have the Hamsterdam blame fall entirely on the police, and decides to spin it against the mayor's office. Rawls asks if he's going to go to the newspapers, but Burrell states that he's leaving that to a contact. Burrell then calls Tommy Carcetti. Royce also disgusts Watkins by pursuing the idea against his recommendations. So,
Right.
yeah, we just see more chats, and it's probably worth mentioning here that the guy who plays the health commissioner is Kurt Schmoke is his name, and he is an ex-Baltimore mayor who has strongly campaigned for drug legalization in the past, or something similar to Hamsterdam, really. So he's pretty much playing himself here, we see, putting forward his own views by the looks of it.
Yeah, this scene is interesting because we see a bit of a good side in terms of his intentions with Royce. We have, like I mentioned last episode, we've seen a lot of electioneering going on, to quote the Radiohead song, and we've not seen a whole lot of him making these more mayoral decisions unless they're just there to protect him or whatnot. But here he seems to genuinely recognise this sort of good drop in crime. And that there might be value, or some kind of middle ground, some kind of happy medium that they could take without, making an enemy of themselves. And I think he does understand the implications, especially considering, can't remember exactly who it is, but someone mentions about he will be sort of named the most dangerous man in America or something, which is a very on point statement. That's a very, very true. I can imagine sort of Fox News coming out and the most dangerous man in America, and he's trying to legalize drugs. So I can totally see that happening. So that was a good point being made. But it's interesting, perhaps, to see that Royce here is a shadow of where Carcetti might find himself. This is the kind of decision where Carcetti might try and do the right thing, and he will be trapped by these ideals. And we can see how Royce may have been more like Carcetti, more idealistic, more wanting to be right all of the time, and to make good on all these promises. But this is just another scenario which I'm sure he's no stranger to, where he's got to eat the bowl of shit, as Carcetti has to find out later in season 4.
Yeah, as it's later put, absolutely. And he's doing a good job of sort of fighting off his assistant's commands, really. Coleman Parker is so against what's going on right now, and it needs to be shut down. And the strong stance on drugs needs to be retained if he's got any hope of a political future. And I mean, he almost seems to sort of throw up at one point, doesn't he? He seems to sort of storm out, and he's just incredibly concerned by Royce's entertainment of the idea. So clearly Royce is not being too won over by his advisors in this situation.
Apart from there's those guys they're like health officials or something, and they're talking about the public health benefits.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, so these are the guys that he seems to have sort of hired as the more kind of on the street consultees, I guess. But yeah, and of course that leads to Burrell at least inferring that Royce wants to throw him under the bus yet again. Find a way to put it all on them. Political protection, of course, and we now see that Burrell's been there enough after his track record for being thrown under the bus. It's kind of a satisfying logical that he calls Carcetti, and the show's laid the groundwork for this very, very well, and it feels like a very earned twist, because we've seen the really kind of tricky relationship that's developed between Burrell and Carcetti throughout the season.
Now he sees a genuine bit of value.
Absolutely. It's time that he earns something from that relationship, as he sees it.
And clearly loses. I mean, it's been mentioned before how his support from Odell Watkins is waning, but it's definitely pretty much fallen apart here, as we can tell by his facial expression a bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll quickly go through this next bit. I think it's covering the same stuff really, but we'll just go through it. And so it's Parker that's adamant that the Hamsterdam scheme must be shut down immediately. Parker knows that Burrell called for authorization to do so. Royce demands that they at least talk about sustaining the project and using a different name. Royce is given support from the health officials, who claim that from a public health perspective, Hamsterdam users are participating in needle exchanges, on-site HIV and drug testing, with many users even considering drug treatment. They state that authorization from the mayor's office could increase their ongoing works. State's Attorney Stephen Demper talks about sustaining the project as a law enforcement strategy to better investigate high-level drug dealers. Dedeker Watkins, however, is with Parker in being most opposed to keeping Hamsterdam afloat. Watkins warns Royce that as soon as the media exposes Hamsterdam, Royce will lose support of the ministers and several City Hall officials, and then will be subject to action from both the state government and the Department of Justice. Royce continues listening to ideas, feeling that with a 14% decrease in felonies citywide, he can justify the Hamsterdam situation to his advantage. So, I guess that's just going through the facts that they discussed there. And let's not forget that it's a big 14% bump that's kind of acting as the bait here.
Yeah, and it's it is a good statistic to have. It's a city where the major problem is crime, and if you've got this sudden huge decrease, then perhaps the controversy of the method used to obtain that fall can be tempered somewhat by the amount that it's gone down.
Yep.
That's just his thinking, which is reasonable in the time.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, all the stuff we're discussing, we're actually... These guys are kind of glossing over it from a very top-down point of view, but obviously we see it later on the ground from the perspective of Carcetti and Colvin. So it's nice to see how that stuff mirrors up and how the 14% crime decrease actually looks in the city. And it looks very, very positive over most of the Western. So, there's certainly a lot of gravity to what Royce is saying about entertaining it.
But otherwise, like you say, that's just more of them explaining
Yeah, absolutely.
what will happen, basically.
So should we move on to the next real thing, the next scene? So Burrell meets with Carcetti in a darkened bar and tells him all about Hamsterdam. He spins the story so that the blame rests with the mayor's office for the intense pressure that they've been putting on the department to reduce crime. Carcetti wonders why Royce has not moved to close down Hamsterdam yet. Burrell explains his fear that Carcetti will use him as a scapegoat. Burrell asks Carcetti to give the story to Gray, as he hopes to endear himself to the new challenger for mayor, now that he's burning his bridges with Royce.
So we brought this up a little bit already as well, how Burrell is taking advantage of this relationship at last. He sees some value there. And he wants Gray to run with it because it gives him more power. And I guess this is a bit of an advantage to Carcetti, who can split Royce's vote in half, essentially, if Gray can really make an impact and use this story to his advantage.
Yeah.
Which strengthens Carcetti's position. So this is something that he may have wanted to be able to bring out himself, as it would be that attack on the mayor that he's really been looking for. Absolutely,
yeah. And I think it's just as telling for Carcetti, this scene, when he realises that... Because I think he has such a sort of sense of pride that he assumed that Burrell would give the story to him. And then all of a sudden he remembers that it's Gray that's running for mayor. Like, I haven't announced yet. So perhaps I need to go public ASAP with this before Gray gets too far ahead. And of course, as you said, like, he does need to get on it. And I do believe that next episode, when Hamsterdam is destroyed or sort of broken down, the media moves in, and both Gray and Carcetti, take part in big police interviews or big media interviews explaining how this has been an absolute travesty for the city. So both of them are kind of at loggerheads by that point. Yeah.
That kind of pushes that bit forward. So I'm thinking the next bit will be where he meets with Terry.
Let us have a look. Yep, absolutely. This is actually a very, very big section. And it's going to be the biggest of the episode, so let's quickly bear with it, and then we'll get to the shorter stuff. So Carcetti discusses the story with Terry. She suggests that the police commander responsible, Major Colvin, may want to talk about the story if Burrell is painting him a villain. Carcetti manages to get Colvin's cell phone number by calling his office. Carcetti has little luck contacting Colvin, so eventually visits him at home. Carcetti asks for Colvin's side of the story to counter Burrell's explanation. Colvin then gives him a tour of the Western, showing him the impact his efforts have made. They visit empty drug corners, the district headquarters, and view real police work being done in catching a felony church burglar. Colvin then takes Carcetti to a neighbourhood council meeting where they hear that local community policing is once more possible in the Western. Carcetti sees from this that most of the residents are happier and safer from Colvin's experiment. As they leave, Colvin asks why Carcetti is so interested in his district, as he is unsure of his motive in coming to the place. Colvin then points to a former funeral parlour that was once segregated for whites only, before the neighbour underwent a demographic shift. He then tells Carcetti a story about the owner, Mr. Stryker, who refused to service blacks. Colvin claims that in the days, kids asked Stryker if he would ever serve blacks at the funeral parlour, and Stryker claimed that he would under the condition that he could bury them all at once. Carcetti is sickened by the response, unsure of why Colvin is amused, until Colvin explains that he respected Stryker's honest racism, as unlike most people, Colvin always knew where Mr. Stryker stood. Finally, Colvin shows Carcetti Hamsterdam itself. After showing him the good that had occurred from his experiment, it was time for Carcetti to see the ugly. Carcetti questions Colvin's motives in embarking on his scheme, and Colvin says he wanted to try something different for dealing with the drug problem. Carcetti sees open drug dealing and is told by Colvin to explore the area on his own, as it's a journey he must travel if he wants to reach those in this neighbourhood. Carcetti leaves the Western, unsure of what to think about Colvin's experiment. He is sickened by the drug-sanctioned areas, but intrigued that the West Side citizens are much happier and safer than they've ever been due to Colvin's resalvaging of the district.
Yeah, that is a big section.
Yeah.
So let's start with the meeting with Terry, which makes sense. He goes to his advisor, and she makes a good call about getting Colvin's side of it as well. He doesn't want to just buy it entirely from Burrell, especially for someone who I think Carcetti's smart enough to see that he is very much in depth with the politics. He knows how to protect himself, even though he does have a thing for getting shat on from a great height. He also has developed the ability to perhaps deflect it quite nicely, and it would be a wise move of him to investigate fully before accepting entirely what he says. Because there's a strong method of protection going on here for Burrell. So, yeah, he needs to discuss it with Colvin as well, get the other side of the story.
Yeah, a very good move, and we see that he goes through great lengths to actually get in contact with him, as we might expect. I don't think anyone who's just been fired for those reasons and given their holiday leave would ever want to kind of entertain a counsellor's calls, but I think Carcetti does a good job of instantly luring him in once he mentions very quickly that I'm here for you. I'm not here to kind of exploit you for what you've done. I'm here to hear your side of the story and try my best to stop them from spinning whatever they want against you. Obviously, we see that that's not exactly what Carcetti ends up doing, as is a very common theme with him. Good intentions often sort of fail to selfish impulses, but clearly Colvin's won over by this, and Colvin gives him a really fantastic tour of the neighbourhood. Really knocks the nail on the head in terms of making him understand what he's done here and why it makes sense from his point of view. So yeah, a really good sort of set of scenes that are smattered quite nicely across the episode, as we see a lot of the positivity. Yeah,
it's nice, that little scene that they have in the actual Western District office, where they start off by asking those two guys, what they've arrested someone for, and it's talking about those church burglaries. And it mirrors those earlier scenes where we had Herc and Carver, and he would ask them that question, and it would be things like loitering and really silly crimes like that. Whereas on this, it's a bit more of a legitimate crime, so we can see how the policing has changed in that time.
Yeah.
And there's an emphasis being done on quote unquote real police work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really good to see that. And in fact, again, in terms of small arcs in the show, the guy that they spoke to, I think he had a sort of goatee and longer hair. Bobby Brown is his name, and he's one of the Western officers. And that's when Carcetti is speaking to him. So he was also the reporting officer at the scene of William Gant's murder in the pilot when Bunk turned up to work it.
Right.
He had a shaved head back then, and He's one of the more prominently depicted officers throughout the 4th and 5th seasons. And he's also one of the main patrol officers on the Corner, HBO's The Corner show. So, yeah, it's cool to see him sort of coming back after a long gap.
And then it takes us on to that neighbourhood council meeting, which is a really nice scene. It feels really, it's a very, very genuine scene, and the people in that scene seem like they are actual residents. They don't seem like actors and actresses, or, you know, they seem like they really are residents.
Yeah, definitely.
They probably are.
Yeah, I almost got that sense, because we know how much The Wire uses kind of, not even actors, just people that are living what they're acting, and it certainly felt like that with the lady who was speaking and sort of, you know, told the copper not to interrupt her, which was a nice touch. And I love how Colvin really sort of was really won over by that speech as well. The smile on his face was fantastic as he saw the lady kind of confirming all of the things he'd done were perhaps for the better.
There is more of an air of positivity to it as well. I mean, the last council meeting we saw was a bit more rowdy, and there's a lot of ire being directed towards the community relations sergeant. And this time, although he is still getting a bit of a talking to, it feels like there's also an air of encouragement from that lady who sort of, you know, that she says that she's not finished and everything. Despite that, there is an air of encouragement to it because she's talking about what has been happening recently in this new police work, and you know, they need to keep this up. This is what policing is supposed to be for them. Yeah.
And there's a certain kind of parallel with what Colvin said to Carver last week regarding getting to know the people on the corners. Obviously, with what the woman says, this old-fashioned community policing it feels like it's achievable again. There's certainly that sense of optimism that it can be done, and that it's already starting to happen again. So it was really cool to see that, and not if it's for the inevitable kick in the teeth that we'll get at the season's end, but you know, for the time being, it's very positive here, and it's nice to contrast this meeting with the way it's being very clinically and politically discussed over at City Hall, away from all the success stories and the real things that are happening on the ground aren't really being discussed. As McNulty says, it never really connects to D'Agostino.
Yeah, it's far more about the political fallout, and you know, it's never about what's actually happening on the street, like you say. It's more cynical.
Absolutely.
And there's another little parallel being made here, or just pointing to a truth of the street, perhaps. That resident talks about. She's saying about you know, most of the boys on them corners are only playing hard, or only pretending to be hard, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is demonstrated later on with Cutty and his gym, where those guys that come to his gym and are training and fighting those younger kids, they're not actually good at fighting. You know, they don't actually really know what they're doing when they come into a situation like that. They just kind of stand there and get beaten on a lot. So it's almost like on the street they would be acting hard and pretending to be gangsters or whatever, but when it comes to an actual kind of proper fight with someone who's like, you know, looks like they're 5 years younger than them, they don't know what they're doing. They're only acting hard. And I thought that was a good connection being made.
That's really nice, actually.
She's talking about the fact that, you know, most of these kids, they aren't actually that tough.
Yeah, that wisdom. And, I mean, we see it again, like Justin and Spider last week were just really playing the tough guys against Cutty, trying to test him. And we see now that, you know, their honest reality side of them has come out, and, you know, they're really, you know, they're just quite encouraging behaviour in terms of what they're doing at Cutty's gym now. That they're really kind of putting some effort in, which is nice.
I have more to say about the Cutty bits, but I'll hold off until we actually get there. So.
Yeah, sure. I think there's probably more to say about this bit as well. It's such a huge moment.
Yeah, we've got a bit to go on this bit. So we have the bit where Colvin is, you know, he's questioning Carcetti's intentions.
Yeah, that's right.
Would you say that you know? I felt like he was prejudging Carcetti a little bit there. For a guy who seems to be trying to take a bit of an idealistic stance and is trying to make this big idea really happen, and someone comes to him to help out, and he seems suddenly quite cynical about the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he addresses that most directly with that funeral parlour story, doesn't he? And I guess that's just the thing, that it's so ingrained in society that there's a sense that any politician is just out to, to have not noble intentions or kind of problematic intentions, and I guess there's always going to be that caution that was laid there with Colvin, and as we see later on, it's well-founded caution, because Carcetti doesn't actually fight for Colvin's corner at all. He completely condemns what happened in Hamsterdam for his own gain in the next episode. So
Yeah,
in many ways, it was right to question it, and which is a shame considering how an amazing job Colvin did of really, really getting to the heart of what's happened here. So I thought that was good, and obviously mentioning that racist pastor, or the funeral home burial man. It's very true of Colvin that he'd rather hear the grim truth than face a cover-up. So that's a key element of the character, and a nice way of putting across a message to Carcetti that politicians can't be trusted. Like, I don't really trust what your intentions are here at all. So I thought that was quite nice. But it is good how he asks Carcetti if he's ever seen a meeting like this one, when they're at the end of the meeting. And we know he was there for the original one in episode 4. Both those people were there as well. He was with Marla Daniels at the time, I think, getting a sense of the districts. So the change can only be all too apparent for him, which is nice that they've made that connection.
Yeah. I think the bit with Colvin questioning him, it ties into that difficulty with Carcetti's character, because, like you say, in the end he ends up not doing that at all because of the advantage to his political career. But in that moment, he probably does intend to.
Yeah. I think that really.
So, like you say, it's always the best of intentions, but not always the follow through.
I think there's possibly not one moment where Carcetti actually acts on those good intentions. There's always one thing right at the last minute that kind of pulls him back towards himself. So it is tricky. And anything else? I thought he got his cell number very easily from the department administrator. You'd have thought that he'd be, Colvin would be on lockdown after what had happened. I guess they're too busy dealing with the aftermath, and they just handed Colvin's number straight over to him. But maybe that's just...
He's a councilman.
I suppose so, yeah.
It's not exactly unimportant.
Yeah. Just thought it was worth questioning. But yeah, it probably is quite common practice. And I guess there's the bit at the end when Colvin actually sees Hamsterdam himself, when they do the ugly bit rather than the
Carcetti,
good.
you mean?
Sorry, yeah, Carcetti, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really cool scene. I mean, it's nice that we don't need to see it again. We've already seen what Amsterdam looks like enough times, even though it is at one of these areas, one of the sites that I don't think we ever really see. It's at it's not at the sort of the Vincent Street.
I think it is. I think it's
Is it the Vincent
it's
Street
the main one. Yeah, it's the main one. It seems like it's gotten quieter though. But I guess we saw it at
That's
a much...
why I thought it might be the other one. It kind of looked a bit... Don't know.
No,
but anyway,
yeah,
it's a good scene because we know what Amsterdam roughly what it looks like anyway. So the emphasis here is on Carcetti and his reaction, and it's a bit disorienting, and you can actually feel the overall ambient level of all the noise going on kind of rise, and there's a lot of space made for that. And there's just all this whirling going on around Carcetti, and we can just see him a bit dumbfounded by what he's looking at.
Yeah, these little winces of activity sort of in the background, out of focus, and just this close up on his eyes. It really is quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really, really nice choice of shot.
Yeah, and at that point we can see him for a well-intentioned politician. There's no way that the way he's responding to this would suggest that he has any other desire than to do something to help out. But I guess once you've been in the city hall for too long, there's that disconnection that develops. Yeah, so a long section, a lot to discuss. Anything else you want to add here, Alex? Or
no, I think that's pretty much it, really. Other than, like you say, Carcetti is left with a bit of a difficult decision. It never seems like he's scheming. He's not really that kind of character, I suppose. But at the end of it, the amount of value that it provides politically, and it's entirely in the hands of the person and what they choose to do with that information. Like with Royce, he's thinking about how this information, as powerful as it is, could be used. It's more about how they can use it to have a particular effect, not how it can have an effect on communities or how it can have an effect on individuals or the city as a whole, or a long-term plan on solving problems, or trying to come to terms with these solutions with the levels of government above them. It seems to be, it's presented as unthinkable that any of the other government departments, like Department of Justice or whatever, that they could ever accept this. So it just becomes about how they can deal with it and protect themselves, and as we've mentioned many times before, and about how these institutions can sort of seal themselves up from these difficulties, and none of the conversation is being steered towards what's actually happening on the street, and we get a flavour of that ourselves through the meeting and through Carcetti's visit to Hamsterdam. And very effective section of the story. Yeah,
definitely. It really, as you say, complements those scenes lovely, sort of really nicely. You get both sides of the story. Okay. All right. So
What's next?
the Barksdales, and we have we have 4 sections for the Barksdales. So let's kick off with Stringer meeting with Levy to discuss the lack of return he is seeing from his political contributions to Clay Davis. Levy tells Stringer that he's been rain-made. Davis is taking the money for himself instead of for the bribes he's told Stringer he's using it for. Levy furthermore explains that there are no bribes in the development business. Every contractor who is awarded money has done so on a passing of specifications, and that Clay has a reputation for pocketing bribes that should not have been worked from the beginning.
Well, this is, again, I mean, we've already had a long string of Stringer failures, and here's another one just to start us off here with this episode. It's a really, really, I really love that ominous white tower in the background as Stringer, learns that he's been played. And really hear Avon's words about him not being smart enough for them out there.
Mm.
It's a really nicely done, it's like this power and untouchable position that's out of his reach, and Levy's smart enough to know what's really going on, of course. I really like that he states that there are no bribes. That's obviously a really good point, is that nobody is really actually going to risk themselves to take a bribe like that and start planting large amounts of money on the table, because it's just too blatant.
And it also
I was just going to say that it's kind of, it's Stringer's naivety that he can just throw money at the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think that, if you are someone who's been brought up on this kind of informal economy of the drug trade that doesn't operate with the same level of interference and government moderation and stuff like that, that you would just assume that bribes are the way things get done. And it makes sense that naivety is there. And there's a lot of learning to do before he can really understand how to actually get things done in the actual legitimate sector. So really fantastic moment. Levy's unashamedly amused. There's no empathy at all here. It's just Stringer's made a stupid move, and you're going to learn 2 big lessons. 1, don't give money to someone who you're not aware of, and don't expect bribes to work in this sector. So as a man of the street, he was ripe for taking advantage of like this. And I thought it was quite good because it pointed out how in many ways the game is even more fierce and dog-eat-dog in the legitimate sector. Whilst the violence is not around, perhaps there's people playing intricate mind games, putting people through plenty of manipulation to get the same result. So Stringer would need to smarten up far more and become far more savvy if he were to continue legitimizing his business. And I think just a great demonstration of that morally grey scale that The Wire does so well. It's really, really apparent here when we're suggesting that people that work legitimately in the government are actually far more corrupt in many ways.
I feel like it rounds off that earlier scene with Clay Davis really nicely as well, where he's talking to him about crawl, walk, then run, and how Stringer insists that he's ready, and Clay is right, despite the fact that he is playing him. He's right in this regard, that he notices that Stringer isn't ready. He's still got that the mind of the street on him, and because he's so insistent to go ahead with it, that's when he realizes that he can just totally milk him for even more, because he's completely naive to the situation.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, and Clay obviously has the reputation of doing this to more than just Stringer.
Definitely, yeah. Stringer's chickens coming home to roost, really. Or is it golden geese? Even Levy knows of, Clay's ridiculous lies, the golden goose and is it the faucet, the golden faucet? So
The money faucet.
yeah, it's ridiculous.
The money faucet.
Oh dear, you should get Levy involved far earlier, Stringer. But I do totally agree with you on the way that this scene is shot. It's beautiful. They're stood in that darkness, trapped away from the city hall, very symbolic of Stringer's efforts. And we assume that right as they are speaking, there's probably a panel of Royce-based people chatting about Hamsterdam. So he's sort of been locked away from all that stuff.
And it emphasises the out there of Avon's statement. Not smart enough for them out there. And they're very much in that dark archway and sort of hidden away. And out there is that giant white shining tower of government and policy and the sort of the big world that Stringer thinks that he's part of, but he's not. He's so much smaller.
Yeah, it looks like such a the sun is shining, the skies are blue, and just they're stuck in the shadows here, aren't they? There's a real sense of that difference, yeah.
Especially when you think about how he's been talking to Avon about them, running the city and everything. It's just, you can see the naivety in what he's saying.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, yeah.
So I really would like to see a sort of Better Call Saul style spin-off show just with Levy.
Yeah.
I just love Levy.
Yeah.
Wish he was on the show more.
He could be really good actually as a spin-off. There's a lot to him that we don't know, and I'm sure he's very entertaining. But yeah.
He clearly has a lot of clients across both worlds.
No doubt. Alrighty. Next up. So this is Stringer and Avon. So Stringer angrily looks for Avon. He is enraged when Slim Charles' new soldier keeps him from his partner. With Avon yet to arrive, Stringer tells Slim he has the task for him. Kill Clay Davis. Slim claims that while he's willing to murder known enemies, the death of Davis requires the skills of a professional assassin and may be beyond his reach. Avon arrives at the beginning of the conversation but remains in the background listening as Stringer attempts to coerce Slim to undertake the hit. Avon then enters the room and mocks the fact that Stringer wants to hit a senator. Avon says that killing a downtown man like Davis would incur the wrath of the state police and federal government and would require a Day of the Jackal-type assassin in order to successfully pull it off. Avon says that if Stringer has lost money, then he should handle it like a businessman, rather than like a gangster, and that the financial losses are Stringer's responsibility, not the organisation's.
Well, how shut out does Stringer feel now? I mean, he's not even trusted by the actual members of the organisation. He feels like an intruder at this point.
Yeah.
It's gone from him being, very much 50-50 with Avon, and now he's not even welcome there anymore, and it's just really crept up. It's really nicely done.
Slim's being quite nice to him. Slim's trying to soften the blow and not outrightly telling him that he's not welcome. Like, he's like, that this guy's new. He's not. It doesn't mean it. He's not being offensive. That he doesn't know who you are. But yeah, it was kind of hilarious that this bodyguard didn't even know who the hell Stringer was. They just saw this businessman walking in.
I like how casual he is as he's being, potentially asked to murder someone. He's just like, "Who are we hitting? Like,
yeah.
Who are we killing today?"
Makes sense. I mean, they operate out of this war zone now, don't they? This warehouse that they seem to have found that represents all their militaristic efforts. So I guess
I said before that part of it kind of almost resembles a barracks. There's like a barracks kind of feel to it, and it's also nice that Slim knows Clay Davis, the Clay Davis.
Yeah, it's really, really cool that he actually knows who he is.
Downtown Clay Davis.
It really speaks to the fact that he's not just, this gangster. In order to be a smart gangster, you have to have a lot of elements to you, and you need to do the Prop Joe thing of looking up what's going on in the city, knowing about all the police prosecutions going on, the paperwork that goes with it, and obviously there's a lot of that going on that we're perhaps not privy to. So it's really, really cool to hear that.
Yeah, well, it emphasises also that it is another world. He's a downtown person. He's kind of not one of us. There's a sense of untouchability about him. And obviously they spell that out completely by the fact that they're not going to be able to just kill a senator, and just suddenly get away with it. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's like a moment of madness for Stringer. It's reached the point where so much stuff has happened and he's had so many failures, that he's losing his mind a little bit. He's now, I feel like Stringer would have never in a million years made a suggestion like that earlier on in season 1 and 2, where he had a bit more handle on things. Now, because everything is falling apart, he's just absolutely lashing out, not even thinking straight. It's just a serious sign of the downfall that is about to befall him.
Very impulsive, absolutely. And they absolutely kick his ass, as we've said. Like, not only is killing him stupid and short-sighted in terms of affecting the viability of their operation, but it's also not a business-like way of dealing it. You know, Avon, who's not a businessman, understands how business works better than Stringer. From what we understand, just from this conversation anyway, you know, you have to find a way to deal with it like a businessman, and there's a sense that he really can't escape these gangster roots, which is, I believe, a D'Angelo line probably. But yeah,
they hit him most hard by throwing his own words back at him. You know, you wanted to handle it like a businessman.
Yeah.
He's really just throwing his own words back in, making it really sting for Stringer.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And he sort of underlines it all by, you know, playing them away games.
Yeah,
Just,
I mean, that a brilliant reference as well to, season 1?
What, with the basketball?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true, actually, yeah.
The game day.
Yeah, definitely. So there's just these nuggets of wisdom that come out of Avon's mouth that really do put him in a higher echelon than Stringer, really. And you know, stuff like that. They saw your ghetto us coming from miles away. There's just this sense of this sort of, you know, this sense, this sort of streetwise element that goes beyond what Stringer can see. It's really, really satisfying, and Avon is just a great character.
Yeah, I mean, how good is Wood Harris in this episode? Like,
yeah,
he's just absolutely brilliant.
Such a sort of natural role, isn't it, that he plays? You don't sort of question it for a second. And just an incredible scene of the major Avon Stringer scenes. There are quite a few this season. I think this one is probably fighting for second place after the balcony one. Very short but very telling, and the Slim Charles interaction sort of makes it a lot more interesting as well. So.
Yeah, it started off by having Slim as a bit of a mediator. Things get a bit more sinister when he's gone, so we'll discuss that later on, no doubt.
Yeah, alright, so our third Barksdale section. So Stringer calls and arranges a meeting with Colvin. He offers Colvin more information about Avon. Stringer claims that Avon is like his brother, but he cannot let him continue his war with Stamfield. Stringer tells Colvin that he came to him because of his reputation as the man who created Hamsterdam. He tells Colvin about Avon's wartime safe house and gives him the address. Stringer insists that his actions are merely business. Meanwhile, Avon is in a barbershop getting a haircut. Brother Mouzone visits him and tells him that he has learned that Stringer set him up. Avon offers to pay for Stringer's actions with money. Brother Mouzone tells Avon that money will not settle the debt, and that Avon must maintain his word and reputation to continue dealing with New York. Avon is forced to give up Stringer to appease Mouzone and maintain his business. So it's a dual scene here, a lot of parallels going on as each person sets up the other.
It obviously starts off with that strange graveyard meeting. It seems very, very ominous to be meeting in a graveyard like that.
Yeah.
That those themes of death already, creeping in with a little bit of throwing it right in your face here with Stringer.
I guess because Mouzone was in the other scene, you had to find a way to make the other scene a little bit more larger than life, and I guess the misty graveyard does that.
Yeah, it was like looked like it could be a graveyard from Goosebumps or something.
Yeah.
It had all of the completely unnatural amount of light pouring onto this dark area, a place where there's almost never any lights, and
definitely,
all the mistiness and sort of this mysterious conversation. So yeah, it did kind of try to retain a little bit of that in order to partner up with the Mouzone section as well, which I suppose made it seem a little bit more of a natural transition, which is good.
Yeah,
I believe
definitely.
This is the bit. I'm not sure if it's this bit or one of the earlier sections, but it's at one point Colvin talks about the fact that he's not going to claim any kind of victory with Amsterdam. Maybe he says it to Carcetti instead. But I just wanted to mention this, the fact that it's a nice foreshadowing of our next episode, where it's all about mission accomplished.
Yeah.
It seems very much kind of thrown in the face of that idea. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, the mission accomplished title was very much inspired by the whole War on Terror and George Bush deciding to arbitrarily climb aboard a massive aircraft carrier with a big banner that said mission accomplished. It's obviously a throw on that.
Mm.
And Colvin is taking this slightly more on the ground, slightly more humble, realistic, doing the good for his community kind of approach, where it's not about claiming a victory or anything like that, because their work is far from over.
Mm.
And that ties into the whole War on Terror thing, where you're going into Iraq or Afghanistan trying to claim some kind of victory when it's not even clear exactly what it is you were trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of parallels going on. I'm not sure if Colvin does say that. I think he does say it in this scene, actually.
I can't remember if it's here with Stringer or if it's with Carcetti earlier on. But he definitely does say that he's not going to claim any kind of victory, which to me just screamed the foreshadowing of the next episode.
Yeah, it's true. I think he might say it just before they talk about their dual attempts at reform. Because they say, I think Stringer says to Colvin, "You ain't the only one who's trying to change this game, I see."
Yeah.
Which is perhaps the most kind of meta line in the whole show, where they seem to be aware a little bit more of what's going on in terms of the wider purposes of the characters.
Yeah, the characters discussing the very themes that we're seeing through the show.
Because one of the things the show does is the characters are so bogged down in their own motivations that there's never a sense that they can see things from the big holistic view that we do as the viewer. And that this is perhaps the only time that the characters ever suggest that they're seeing it from that big macro sense, that theme sense, as we say, that thematic sense. So it was really nice that they mentioned that, and it felt right. Again, mirroring up with Brother Mouzone, you can take things with a bit more of a pinch of salt. So
not only that, but very often we have characters on very personal crusades, and it's very solo. They're battling against everyone else. They're trying to introduce some new idea and win favour of others. And this is one of those examples where we have two characters realising that they're not alone in trying to make changes, and that even though they're still very much personal agendas, they kind of recognise that they're not the only ones with that sort of thing, and that it doesn't always have to make them enemies of one another.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
And it seems like Stringer was someone who would have really, he didn't really at first, but kind of grew on the idea. Something like Hamsterdam would be of tremendous interest to someone like Stringer, who was only interested in the business side.
Yeah.
And all of the elements that were removed by Hamsterdam were all the elements that he was not interested in. He just wanted to be able to make money in an environment that didn't require them to have any of that, as he says, gangster bullshit.
Yeah. And it was
it's very much an idea that he would have solidarity with, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think so, and it's probably the fact that he made that move, Colvin made that move, that Stringer felt comfortable in going to see him about this. Someone who's a little bit willing to get a little bit liberal with the rules would obviously perhaps be more willing to entertain this kind of deal that Stringer's setting up here. And of course, Stringer was, I'm sure, very much pleased with Hamsterdam itself, what he set up. I'm sure he has an affinity with him for that reason as well. So it's good to see these characters that do have a lot in common meeting for the one and only time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next bit we have move on to Avon with his haircut, and Mouzone shows up, and this is where he makes his own little bargain here. Avon has to give up Stringer because, with him being shut out of the co-op, he knows that if he's not able to keep up the connect that he's got with New York, it's without any kind of decent product to sell.
Yeah.
All of this war stuff is going to become completely meaningless because they're fighting over territory that he can't even use.
Yep, absolutely, and we never hear the moment that Avon actually agrees to give Stringer up here to Brother.
It's very, very strongly implied. The Wire likes to leave these things unsaid, but it doesn't take much to realise what the decision is going to be.
No, there's that inevitability, isn't there? And because I don't know if he tries very genuinely, but he certainly does attempt to see if he can settle it financially instead. This ain't good enough for brother. It's only made clear. It's only explicitly mentioned that he's turned him in when he asks him about the timings on the balcony. I think, what time are you going to be where later on? But there's certainly an attempt that even as much contempt as he has for Stringer now, there's still this friendship bond that he can't break, and however much money he could spend would be a better sacrifice than Stringer himself, which is interesting. There's a little bit of exposition as well, isn't there, in this scene where Mouzone basically goes through the events of season 2, and Avon mutters under his breath, "Proposition Joe package," as if to kind of just let the audience know that he has put everything together, because I guess it is quite a complicated situation to just assume, not having known anything inside prison. So that's sort of one thinking out loud moment that doesn't feel that wiry, but I guess you have to make some concessions sometimes.
Yeah, it's just filling in some gaps.
Yeah. I think
that's about it for those bits, I think.
Yeah. All right. So next up, we have a final Barksdale bit, as you mentioned, on the balcony. Avon and Stringer meet up for a late-night drink. Stringer apologises for not dealing with Marlowe Stanfield sooner. Avon is nostalgic about the shoplifting days of their youth. Avon asks Stringer to dream with him, and Stringer tells him they do not need to dream because they own so much now, including real estate. Stringer tells Avon that he can't drink too much since he's visiting the development site the following day. Avon asks him what time Stringer plans to meet with the property developer so that he can tell Mouzone where to find him. Stringer is confused why Avon would ask him about the time he is meeting and stutters to answer. Avon tells Stringer to relax more, and Stringer says that he will as soon as things settle down, but he claims he does not take his work too seriously. Avon sarcastically confirms that it's just business. Stringer worriedly eyes Avon. They embrace and depart for the last time.
Yeah, this is quite a heartbreaking scene. I mean, it's one of the best scenes. I mean, we talked about before about one of the best scenes in The Wire being that bit before where they have their little scuffle. And we really feel the power of that. But this is just that little bit extra notch above, as it finally brings home this really heartwarming moment between them when they're talking about the past, and they were setting up. Apparently, obviously, George Pelecanos, the writer of this episode, apparently the story that they tell about the badminton set and everything is based on something that happened in his childhood. So the stories they tell are based on his childhood stories. But it's this, it's this really nice heartwarming moment between them where we see a little bit more about their friendship from the earlier days, and we have both characters thinking, obviously understanding that they're going to be betraying one another, but also not just thinking of the other person doing the same. They think that they've got away with it. They're both a bit awkward about the sense that they think that they're in the clear to some extent, and it's just coming to terms with their actions that they're taking. And that's kind of what makes it quite difficult to watch in a sense.
I think both of them have perhaps resigned themselves to the fact. The thing that makes it tricky is that they both know that they've turned each other in, but they don't know that the other one has as well.
Exactly.
So there's this, there is this heavy sense of caution to everything that's being said, and they're really sidestepping their differences completely. This big elephant in the room is certainly being sidestepped. But yeah, it's this kind of saying goodbye without, bringing up bad shit that's going to make it an awkward encounter. And that makes it a really, really interesting scene, really quite heartbreaking in many ways.
It is, yeah.
And focusing on those good times, those childhood memories, just kind of tugs at the heartstrings a little bit more. And yeah, just a culmination scene, really, of possibly the best relationship on the entire show. So I can understand why it's heavily revered as often, cited as the best scene in the show.
Yeah, it's an amazing scene, and I mean, as good as Idris Elba is in all of this, I think Wood Harris just pips it a little bit for me. I think he is brilliant in these scenes, and he's also he kind of talks the most, is the most animated and whatnot. So I guess that does make him a little bit more, obvious to the viewer in general. But really, really, really powerful scene, really heartbreaking, a very appropriate goodbye, and it's just both characters coming to terms with what they've done and almost trying to make it a nice moment for them. Both of them are trying to make it a nice moment for the other person, so there's no, even though they think that the other person doesn't realise it's their big goodbye.
Yeah.
They still want to make it a nice moment and something that they could remember before the end. So
Definitely, yeah. So it's a really, really cool scene, and the dynamic going on is awesome, and the twinkly lights and silhouettes of the city skyline really add a lot to it. And I think, as you mentioned before, it's a nice sister piece to the what we saw earlier with Stringer of the view of City Hall. You can tell Avon, I think, really wants to perhaps go on longer, make it a real goodbye, get a bit of drink on. That makes sense. He's the one with more heart of the two. Yet again, business takes over for Stringer, and he's got to remain very cautious, so he cuts the drinks and gets back to work. So it's a lot of elements going on. And there's that final Barksdale and Bell handshake that they have as well, which is one of their signature moves. I guess there is one little wobble where there is a sense that the bad shit's coming into the conversation when Avon asks about the timings. It's a bit of a wobble. Avon then tells him he needs to relax, trying to convince him that it's a very innocent ask and that he'd never want to do such a thing. But
he says it quite harshly, like his tone is... There's a lot of weight to it. There's something about it. He's just like, you need to relax. Like,
yeah.
He's not saying it in a jokey way, even though he's trying to suggest that what he was saying was just a casual comment. So it adds this whole layer upon layer of subtext to this this scene, which is brilliantly done.
Yeah, I mean, it's suggesting, I guess, that the business is making him forget what really matters. And then, of course, I guess another big element of the scene is the difference in their interpretation of what it means to dream. And for Avon, it's reminiscing, staying true to your roots and remembering where you've come from. And for Stringer, it's looking to the future and getting rich, essentially.
And discarding your roots.
Discarding your roots and buying the city and being the king of the city, which he believes they already have. They certainly have the means to financially. They perhaps don't have any of the savvy required, as Stringer's learned this episode, and Avon has seemed to have known for a long time. But yeah, it's not going to stop him from using that money to further himself, I imagine, if he were to stay alive, and he'd find a way to do it. Well,
a lot of what Stringer says seems to be very dismissive of all of the idea of their roots and where they've come from, and he can kind of see the heartwarming side of it, but it's a bit of a inhibitor to him, it seems. He's talking about, we don't have to dream anymore. Like, it's not necessary for us to have these childish fantasies. Let's just go out there and get it. And anything that we lose in the process is fine because we'll have gained all of this power and money, and we own real stuff now. So it just hammers home a little bit more of that naivety from Stringer, and like you say, that Avon has probably recognised all along.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So. Very, very good. I don't think there's much more to say about that, really. I did like the final shot because I think Stringer obviously wanders off and Avon stays at the balcony and he stares at Stringer as he walks out of the apartment, I think. And it kind of zooms right in on Avon's face. And there's this big... I think it's probably a boat in the harbour, but it sounds a bit like a train sort of horn ringing out for a very long time. So it's obviously, I think, that slow train coming, that impending death is sort of underlined quite heavily at the end of the scene. So yeah, really, really nice.
So, yeah, and an amazing scene, one of the best in the whole show.
Yeah, definitely, and one that you really need to watch a few times to appreciate quite the subtlety going on with the characters here and all the elements that are kind of playing into it.
Because in classic Wire style, it's a pretty unassuming scene, really. There's nothing particularly flashy about it visually, or there's no major action. There's not like an argument or anything like that. It's it's a fairly unassuming scene, generally speaking, but once you really get to grips with all that subtext and what's going on, and this great culmination of all of the interactions between these characters and how it's built up to this one point, the final goodbye, it's just immensely powerful.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it shows how a scene can be brilliant, not because of the scene by itself, but because of everything else around it. That's kind of what makes a great scene, is not just it sort of soloing that scene and having it by itself. It's more about because of everything that's come before it and everything else that exists around it. Its context is what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, that history.
It's kind of like with say making a good piece of music. Like an individual instrument by itself may not be all that special, but because of everything else that's around it, its context makes it incredibly powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
So in the same way that's something that happens with this scene here. So, and you're right, it rewards repeat watches, definitely. I mean, the whole show rewards repeat watches, but this is definitely one of those scenes that seems to hit harder every time.
Yeah, definitely. I think because it is so reliant on lots of different pieces of context and different relationships and different plot lines that have come before it. Obviously, the more you watch it, the more you have an understanding of those things, and the more that plays into your interpretation of the scene. So, yeah, it really is a splendid scene. Okay, these scenes are really, there's a lot to say about every single scene, it seems. So we'll try and fly through. I think
we'll put that to one side and move along.
Yeah. Bubbles, one section. I think this should be very short. It's a very short moment, but it does happen, so let's include it. And in Hamsterdam, Bubbles continues to make his living supplying young dealers with T-shirts from a shopping cart. A young homeless boy questions Bubbles about his income, and then suggests that he try selling hoodies now that the season is changing. Meanwhile, Bubbles' last protege, Johnny, is continually getting high in Hamsterdam. He notices Bubbles now working with the homeless boy.
Right, so this is Sherrod, isn't it?
I wish it were. It's not actually Sherrod. Sherrod's a different actor, and we've already seen Sherrod in episode 2, I think. He's just a sort of anonymous street kid. But yeah, it should be Sherrod. It would make much more sense if it were. But this guy seems a lot more on the ball. That this guy seems to have a willingness to be enterprising and learn about this business that Bubbles is running. And Sherrod certainly doesn't fit into that category. And is also looks a bit older and a little bit more trodden on. So yeah, but it's odd. I
had it in my head that this was Sherrod, and then they just kind of changed the actor or something. What happens? I mean, I've actually forgotten what happens with this guy.
I don't think I forgot. I mean, if we do see more of him, I've forgotten as well. But I think this might just be a one-off thing. He has like a lesson for a day, and then I mean, it certainly establishes the whole theme of next season with Bubbles, whereby he has this new protege that's a bit young and naive, and he's trying to train him up, and it all goes horribly wrong. But yeah, and obviously using Johnny to make the transition clearer. We're going from one protege to another. But yeah, this guy definitely isn't Sherrod as far as the actor goes. And you could always argue that they perhaps just changed it. But because we've already seen Sherrod, like in an anonymous appearance earlier, it makes it all the more harder to justify that. It's tricky.
Well, either way, we see also in this bit Johnny, completely disregarding Bubbles on this bit. He's just totally focused on hitting the dope.
Yeah, it's sad stuff really with Johnny, and he's on his deathbed as the guy next to him tells him, like, if you keep popping it like that, you're gonna clock out. He says, I think so. Yeah, and
he's completely lost any kind of self-respect or anything like that. Johnny is just, he's a slave to the needle, and that's where he's going to be until he dies, basically. And it's very depressing, especially when he looks out and sees Bubbles. He's really looking out from this dingy house onto the bright street where Bubbles is trying to make a life for himself. And yeah, it's a really, really tough comparison. Yeah,
and I think this is the last scene where Johnny is actually alive. He's shown next episode just as a corpse. So yeah, this is kind of his last proper scene. And there's not even any excitement to see Bubbles anymore. We sense that he's perhaps not seen him in a long time, but so much time has passed, perhaps, that it's beyond the point where he can try and reconnect with Bubbles. There's just too much distance that's developed in that time, and he's just going to resign himself to the needle.
Like seeing someone that you went to school with when you're at university, and it's someone that you went to school with a couple of years ago, but you didn't know them all that well then.
Exactly
So you
what I
have
was
to be
getting at.
a bit like awkward. You like can't really start a conversation.
Exactly, yeah. There's this acknowledgement that you two have spent a lot of time in the same building, probably, but that's not enough for you to kind of start having a conversation about the old times, because you don't really have any old times to share. It's kind of a really weird. I know what you mean. That's exactly what I was
And like
thinking
the old
of.
times are almost too trivial to bond over.
Yeah,
It's just not enough of a conversation starter. Or whatever. I mean, in their context is very different. You know, we're trying to use school as an analogy when the thing that we're using it against is essentially them taking drugs and stealing and whatnot to fund their drug habit. So
yeah.
but it's on that kind of like it's that kind of context.
That's
isn't it?
that-
It's
that's
they
socially,
have fallen apart socially, and it's they don't have that kind of bond anymore. And although he may recognise the times that he had with him, assuming he can see that through the haze that he's in, he totally disregards him. Doesn't have anything to say. He's not even going to call out his name or anything. That's just the end of it, and it is a very upsetting kind of final scene for Johnny, really, because we just see what a bit of a waste much of his life has been.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
And that's how it'll end, sadly.
Yeah.
There's no happy ending for him.
I know we gave Johnny a lot of shit in the earlier seasons, didn't we, for being quite a frustrating character. I'm not. We can't.
I mean, it's
really...
still sad to see
Yeah.
this happen to him, but I think it's difficult because I mean it becomes a bit complicated once you start talking about whether or not people deserve things like that. I mean, it seems a little bit arbitrary in a way, but strangely enough, although the fact that Johnny is, like you say, a frustrating character and is just a big waster, really, it's still upsetting to see this happen because you realise that this is certainly not alone in this city of people who are falling victim to the needle and just wasting the rest of their lives away and not gaining any kind of meaningful social interactions with people. Everything is just based around the drug.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Yeah, there's quite a fair bit to say about Bubbles, actually, wasn't there? Considering how short those scenes were, I think there's a lot to infer, which is good.
We talked about more about Johnny than Bubbles.
Yeah, which is fair enough because he's about to clock out, so I guess we need to at least give him a little bit of a send-off, I guess. But yeah, any more to say on Bubbles or Johnny?
No, that's about it. It's leading us a little bit more into Bubbles season 4, where he goes from selling T-shirts to having his big depot.
That's right, and I imagine...
Or depot, as he says.
Depot, yeah, without the T, and...
Bubbles Depot.
This protege, of course, gave him the idea to diversify, go beyond the T-shirts, seasonal tastes.
Get seasonal, yeah.
Get seasonal. So yeah, I guess that plays into it as well.
Bubbles winter catalogue.
Yeah.
It's one page.
There's only one copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so another longer, sort of minor, well, not really a minor section, Cutty section. There are 2 parts to this. So Dennis Cutty Wise, as he's fully known, he's built a small following for his community boxing gym, including sometime drug dealers Justin and Spider. The children using the facility are wary of the equipment because it's in a state of disrepair. Seeking funds for the gym, Cutty visits Bodie and asks him to arrange a meeting with Avon. Cutty explains he didn't feel right approaching Avon directly because of the way he left things with him. Avon meets with Cutty at his base of operations. Cutty gives him a sales pitch and talks about Avon's boxing past before Avon eventually tires of his efforts. He asks how much money he needs, to which Cutty hesitantly states $10,000. Avon and Slim Charles erupt in laughter and then give him $5,000 extra, much to the surprise of Cutty, before telling him to take care of his young students.
Yeah, so this is just another emphasis on how much money the Barksdale organisation seems to have, where 10 grand is a pitiful amount. And obviously Cutty's being encouraged to really go and get some new equipment and to try and use Avon as a possible investor. And he talks about having all of these clubs and everything. And it's also interesting that Avon asks that, he says that he doesn't want his picture on any kind of wall or anything like that, but I think Cutty does end up doing it anyway, doesn't he? Because Avon obviously goes back into prison, so he ends up putting his picture up anyway, I think.
Quite possibly, actually, yeah. That sense of respect that flies through. Yeah, that's a good point. I thought it was pretty cool how Cutty's finally starting to be respected by the fairly modest number of students he has now, and there are concerns about the safety of using that broken equipment, which Cutty cannot deny really, and I guess there's yet another step for him to arrange to actually get onto this career of helping the kids out.
And it's encouraging him because if they're wanting better equipment, then it shows that they are at least interested in using it. So
yeah,
it gives him a good reason to go out and try and improve it. And he certainly doesn't have the money himself, so going to someone he knows who does.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, he then goes to see Bodhi because he can't feel like he can go and see Avon directly after having walked out, or walked in and out, as Bodhi puts it on the phone.
Especially seeing as before the money he was working for it, and now he just wants to have it. So
yeah,
might be a little bit brazen just go walking in and, hi, I need some money.
Definitely. It was cool how, did you catch Bubbles rolling by with his new protege while Cutty and Bodhi were talking, like just behind the car? I thought that was a pretty cool little connection. Yeah. So.
And then in the actual meeting with Avon, he's trying to use his boxing past as a means to obviously leverage him into feeling positive about the whole project. And as we mentioned, gets an extra 5,000 for his troubles just because of what a pitiful amount it turns out. So
it's just probably because it was so pitiful in the way it sounded, but also just the respect that Cutty has from the old times. It's clear across the whole organisation. Bodhi, having found out about his history, is obviously very respectful of him. And if you compare it with Bodhi's first meeting, it really has changed a lot. And he's lucky that, Cutty's lucky that he has that playing on his side to his advantage. It's almost like he has qualifications on the criminal side of the law, but not the legitimate side. And that's kind of what helps him to get this boost to start off his boxing gym.
Yeah, in a sense that he didn't really need to work to get any of that money because he did all of his work already.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way of putting it.
He's kind of owed more. It's almost like it's a sort of the gang version of a pension, if you like.
It's a back payment, yeah.
Yeah. He's no longer part of the game, but he's still getting a bit of money in his back pocket for his many years of service.
Yeah, 14 years of service for, taking a murder. That's got to be worth, at least $1,000 a year, I guess, which is what he gets.
I'm not sure. I would technically wouldn't Avon only be paying him for 2 days?
Oh, okay, that's true. The rest of it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's very true. And it's odd how Avon puts Cutty through his paces so much. Doesn't show any real sign of enthusiasm at all until he's tested out all. He sort of seems to test him. And Cutty obviously refers to his history in the boxing, Avon's posters, as we saw as well. It certainly feels like history to us going back to that early part of season 1, where Freamon was digging up the old posters. So it's really nice how that kind of marries up with our interpretation of it as well. And Avon, I guess, must take so much comfort in the history that Cutty represents, particularly in the current climate of the organisation, where everything's so unsettled and all those that period of stability is just gone to crap, and Cutty is just there as a nice reminder for Avon of the traditions that he loves to cling to. And I guess all those things sort of come together and cause him to, have a huge load of respect for him and to happily give him this donation.
And the good news for Cutty continues into our next section, no doubt, where he starts to really develop a bit more of a bond with his students. Yeah.
So with the new equipment in place, Cutty's boxers are eager to spar, and he offers to organise a match with another gym. At the sparring match, Cutty's boxers are bested by much smaller boxers, but Cutty gives them respect for lasting through each round. In particular, he congratulates Justin for his attitude and heart. So just a little short section there.
Yeah, this is a nice bit for Cutty. Things are actually going well for one of our characters, it seems. There is one person who is finally having some success, and Cutty is our success story in this season.
Yeah, alongside, I feel like a lot of the Colvin scenes this episode were really positive as well. Like the community meeting is a really, really positive moment, even if it is going to be shat on. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really kind of end up in that kind of position.
No, yeah.
Whereas Cutty very much has a very positive story with his kids here, and he learns what it is to be a good teacher, and he's able to bring them under control, and they see the value in the discipline. And it's really hits home again with what he was told by that other trainer about, it's not weak, it's the start. And Cutty has really embraced that idea here. He understands that these people aren't going to go out and start beating everybody, but he's going to give them the encouragement to last, and that is what's really important, especially in something like boxing, because it's not just about how hard you can hit, but how hard you can get hit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And it's slightly comedic as well to see these supposed hard street kids go into the ring against, these kids that are like half their size, and they're just throwing punch after punch. And I think it's Justin who says something like, he's getting tired, It's basically just waiting for him to fall over. He's doing a Homer Simpson. Remember the Simpsons episode where Homer becomes a boxer and he basically wins by taking so many punches and the other person getting exhausted. So that's how Justin is going to win.
Yeah, you just got to wait for your moment. But yeah, it's quite cool how Cutty puts it. You guys have got more fire than skills. And that you really have to avoid that complacency. And I like the fact that he then goes and arranges that match, because that's clearly a complacency killer once you see the little small kid just not giving you a word in edgeways or a jip in edgeways. Obviously Spider's got a little bit of an ego that needs a bit of tempering. So yeah, it's cool that. And the boys do a really good job of just not getting riled up by it. They seem to accept it, that they just need to improve, which shows a real kind of maturity that we wouldn't have expected from them necessarily.
There's also, I guess that comes from a respect from what Cutty is teaching them, which is a testament to how far he's come as a teacher.
Yeah.
Quite a turbulent relationship with his students thus far, but that seems to have also strengthened it somehow. So yeah, it's a real positive story for an episode which is otherwise full of turmoil. Yeah,
definitely, and just really good how quickly things are moving for Cutty and the kids. I noticed that these scenes at the end of Cutty's arc, or end of Cutty's story here, were sort of sprinkled amongst the last 10 minutes of the episode, and that was a lot of high drama stuff. Involving Stringer's death, involving the detail getting to the end of their investigation. Obviously, it's quite nice to pepper it with this boxing match, because the boxing match matches the intensity of those scenes and the climax. So I thought that was a really nice way of doing it. And obviously, I think the red versus blue element might have perhaps spoke to Avon and Stringer's friction as well in the final moments. So
I mean, I suppose it doesn't really... Now that I think about it, I suppose although it is kind of positive for him in this episode, I remember in the next episode, isn't it, they all start getting work from Marlowe instead, all of the people in the gym?
Well, I mean, most of the people in the gym are already Marlowe Stanfield drug dealers, like Justin is.
But I mean, like, they start getting more work for them because, with Avon arrested.
Yeah.
Marlowe's back in business, and they all end up leaving, pretty much.
Yeah, that's very true, isn't it? Yeah, because
so I guess it doesn't end all positively for him, but in the sense that he has learnt, he's kind of wanted to become a better teacher and gain a bit of purpose, and he's got that, and he's got his gym, and he's got his equipment. So for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much a positive end for him, and he is a bit of a success story. But because of what's going out on the street, he just happens to be a bit unlucky with retaining his students. So I remember that does happen in the next episode, because obviously Avon gets arrested, Marlowe goes back in business, and they're all Marlowe's people anyway, so they go back out to get paid.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've forgotten about that. And also, I mean, what a fantastic line of encouragement, "You game, Rooster." I just don't really know where it came from. I found it quite hilarious, to be honest. So, yeah, anything else about Cutty? I thought he was really good when when Avon dropped the 15k bomb. Like his sense of being startled and surprised was really, really well conveyed. So I thought that was quite a highlight.
Yeah, he's very, very good in all these scenes. So yeah, that's Cutty. What's next?
So we have the major cases unit. There's 5 sections, and then we're sort of in the home straight after that. So start off with Daniels, and he's updating the investigative board with a photo of Barksdale Lieutenant Shamrock. McNulty, Freamon, and Caroline Massey man their wiretap burners. They record a call between Shamrock and Bodie. Bodie asks for a face-to-face meeting with the man who they assume is Stringer. However, there is no phone call from Shamrock's phone to Stringer to arrange the meeting. Freamon and McNulty later explain to Perlman that Stringer has isolated himself from the rest of the phone network by only talking to Shamrock and providing Shamrock with a separate phone for their communications. Freamon suggests that they can have everyone in the Barksdale organisation from Shamrock down on a conspiracy charge with a week of monitoring those wiretaps. But to collect evidence against Bell and Barksdale, they need to pluck cell phone numbers out of the air. This comment prompts McNulty to leave.
Right, so we rejoin our major case unit.
Yeah.
I guess it's just a little bit of catching up on how they're getting on with their investigation.
Yes.
I mean, this is where they catch their ideas of trying to catch numbers off the cell phone tower. That's about it, really. I mean, it's generally just a bit of another one of those detail roundup scenes.
Yeah, pretty much. I did like the opening scene with Daniels putting up the picture of Shamrock on the board, almost kind of replacing Prez as our guy who stares and admires the chalkboard in his absence. Someone has to do it.
Yeah.
So that was a nice little callback. And yeah, just I guess for all of Stringer's naivety, he certainly was smart with many things, and having this isolated network between him and Shamrock was a great move that really caused the police, a hell of a lot of extra work, extra legwork, which they get through incredibly quickly here. I mean, they seem to solve this at a very accelerated rate, considering the amount of technical work involved. But yeah, so it's cool that, and.
This pretty much just pulls us into our next bit where we have McNulty trying to find the equipment, because like I say, this just sort of gets the idea to them about getting money off the actual towers themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Although I did think it was good at this point where it's clear to us that they pretty much have the entire Barksdale crew wrapped up in charges, and that hadn't really occurred to me before. Everyone up to Shamrock is involved in this burner conspiracy network. Obviously, arresting everyone up to Shamrock wouldn't really do much in terms of knocking down the organisation. There'll be replacements, but it was cool how that's a real lot of progress they've managed there, even if they're shy of the boss.
And it shows that they've managed to dispense all of their phones very efficiently.
Yeah. Once they're up on the network, up on the wire, that's all they need. They can get it very, very quickly sort of down. So, as you mentioned, let's move on to our next bit.
Yeah.
So McNulty arranges a meeting with Fitz to discuss the possibility of doing exactly what Freamon suggested. Fitz tells McNulty that the equipment he needs is already available to City Police because of a Homeland Security grant. McNulty retrieves the machine from the police department basement. McNulty and Freamon set up the machine in a vacant apartment opposite Stringer's photocopying business. They record all cell phone numbers using the nearby tower for signal. They narrow the field back at the detail office by tying specific times that Stringer would be on the phone to their data by monitoring calls to Shamrock. While the detail is monitoring him, Stringer gets a call requesting a meeting. He changes the SIM card in his cell phone so that he can call back on another number. Shamrock then calls Bodie to tell him a meeting has been arranged. This gives the unit their baseline set of call data. Next, Stringer uses his business number to call Colvin on his cell phone, and Lester notes the call. He checks with McNulty, who recommends they wait and see what the connection gives them.
So I mentioned at the start of the show about how I really like these scenes and the way that they demonstrate the connections between characters, and all of these scenes with Freeman working out the data, and it's very cohesively done, whereas perhaps before it felt a bit more disconnected. We see their sort of fairy Fitzhugh come around and turn up and be incredibly useful to them for a brief moment, which he's particularly good at. And they find out that they've got this equipment lying down somewhere in their inventory somewhere, which reminds me of Prez and his the computer that he discovers at the school.
Yeah, that's true.
When he goes down to that storage thing, not only does he discover all those books that are the 5th edition when they're still using the 3rd edition or something like that, but he discovers that computer as well. And it's this talking about how all of these institutions end up spending money on various equipment and they don't even ever end up using it a lot of the times. It gets bundled in some cupboard and everyone forgets about it.
Yeah.
So it's just another good example of that.
Absolutely. Not even Freeman seems to understand that they have this triggerfish thing, all this sort of misallocated resources, really. And I think it ties in quite nicely with Burrell, Royce, and the big politicians not being at the community meeting. They're missing the real point here. They're just kind of trying to look through the trees, or missing the forest, or whatever the phrase goes. But yeah, that certainly did feed into this quite a lot. And as you said, it's good to see Fitz doing another classic patrol park up, but getting it right this time on the right side of the car.
Yeah,
it's just cool. So
he's remembered.
Yeah, not being a patrolman back in the day. And yeah, the department has some useful equipment for once, which McNulty is used to from his old case days. They called it the triggerfish for some reason.
Yeah. Some kind of grant has made it available to them all that time ago. And even the guy who's supposedly looking over all of that big piles of equipment doesn't even know what it is. So
yeah, like the most incompetent guy in the world, quite possibly here. It's laughable.
Just another one of those humps been thrown down to whatever department so that they can sit there and read their magazines and not really do anything.
He's not even doing something intense like creating miniature furniture. He's literally staring at a pair of boobs for like 10 minutes and still can't understand a basic question. It just seems pretty ridiculous, yeah.
Like a lot of these humps in various positions where there's some kind of gatekeeper or whatever, they always have a good skill in thumbing in a particular direction. That's always one thing they're always able to do.
Yeah, that's true. Go and have a look yourself, but I won't actually
Strong
boast.
thumb, that's an important skill for anyone in that position. Must be able to indicate direction.
Oh dear. I love the fact that it actually is Augustus Polk that ends up in this position, like in season 5. He becomes the new evidence control guy who just sort of sits around and enjoys not having to work. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and I guess there's another bit here where Stringer's calls come through and they monitor Stringer's calls, and that includes the call about where he calls through to the Western and to speak to Colvin. And I like how Freeman is concerned by this possible kind of FBI-style internal corruption. And I like that McNulty is very smart and instantly knows exactly why they're doing that. And he then, of course, understands who Colvin's CI is, who he wouldn't explain last week. So obviously he puts a few things together quite quickly there.
Yeah. And now they're going to play a bit of a waiting game and see what this new connection gives them.
Yeah. So, let's go on to our third bit. So, Officer Massey gives McNulty a message from D'Agostino. Shortly afterwards, Freeman pins down Stringer's cell phone number. Both McNulty and Freeman are worried that the cell phone may not last long, and they simultaneously contact Daniels and Perlman. Daniels calls in a favour from Fitz to get the wiretap organised by the end of the day, cutting through potential delays from the wireless companies. Phelan signs the wiretap affidavit and recognises Bell's name from the previous investigation. Phelan still faces animosity from McNulty and tells him to let it go for his own sake. Fitz delivers on his promise by lying to the Bureau, stating that Bell's given name is Ahmed, a name that the Bureau on principle associates with counter-terrorism.
So, Daniels obviously is the one who's principally aware of what went on with the Port case and about how it was a load of mess going on inside the Bureau that caused their Greek to jump ship.
Yeah, well, it was Fitz that told him directly, at the bar, just, I've got to let you know this, like, don't spread it around.
So
but
he was the one that was kind of aware of that, so he uses that information to draw on a bit of a favour. And Fitzhugh again in his infinite usefulness, is able to come up with a solution to their problem by basically giving Stringer a sort of racial stereotype in order to make him somehow legitimate to the FBI.
Yeah.
Which is just very telling of the attitude at the time. I'm not sure if it is representative of actual FBI practices, but I'm not sure. I don't think I'd be surprised if it were.
Yeah, I don't think Fitz was joking. I assume that was genuinely how he got the 1 day turnaround, which seems crazy because like even the FBI said that 3 to 5 days is just, you can't really beat that no matter what you do. So there's clearly a real counter-terrorism drive here.
Yeah, they just got if it's to do with terrorism, they've just got the power to push people in the right direction for whatever reason, or use their own means. They're able to free up their own resources to do it. So
yeah,
whatever it is, they're somehow able to do it.
Pretty hilarious, really. And yeah, as you mentioned with Daniels and that leverage over the shutdown of the season 2 case, you sense that he's really been saving that for a big moment where they're going to need it. And this is right here on the top of the mountain, as Freamon puts it. This is the time to actually kind of cash in on that leverage that he has, and it certainly works. And you really see the pressure on Fitz's face as he really knows he's got to deliver here after what he did to these guys last time. Yeah.
And we can see that Fitz, generally speaking, is a good guy, and he knows that he needs to make good on what he owes. So
yeah, so I guess this gets us to the big moment where Freamon announces it himself, the gravity of the situation. We're on the top of the mountain. It's kind of 3 seasons of major cases work has led up to this moment. And that atmosphere kind of pervades through the latter parts of this episode. There's a real sense of a climax, more so than any of the previous seasons. And the things beginning to get wrapped up, lots of loose ends being tied together. Lots of cutting between institutions as their arcs come to this climax as well, which creates for a much more intense experience. Punctuated by that boxing fight, which was a really nice choice as well. And it's just a really good rhythm. Just another thing that contributes to its, obviously, the attention it garnered at the Emmys. And
that's the main thing that makes it so gripping, is its pacing, and how we have all of these, Freeman's calling Daniels, and they sort of say what each other is doing right after one another. It's kind of like punctuating these beats in the action.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? When they phoned up Perlman and Daniels in unison, and they have this kind of weird kind of echoing going on. It was a nice weird moment. It kind of worked.
I like that.
Yeah.
And there's a real sense of heightening pace, and they're gonna make their move. So yeah, it's very powerfully done in order to make it all seem tangible, because especially when you're dealing with all of this stuff over wiretaps, and you've got to show all these sudden changes in location and where people are being caught from and how they're doing it. Like it's very easy to make sections of story like that very dull, because it is somewhat procedural. It is one of those actual police procedural things where they know how they need to solve the case. They've just got to go and take these actions and hope that they get the result that they want, etc., etc. But it's able to use its pacing and obviously its well-established characters to make it really gripping.
Yeah.
And like I say, it really covers all of those beats of the action, which is just really nicely done.
Yeah, definitely. And I love how Carcetti's final introduction to the plot adds to that a lot as well, because perhaps he has the most stakes of any of the arcs, because he's in this position where he's able to completely swing the way the city interprets Hamsterdam if he acts smart and fast, and all that plays into it as well. So there's all sorts going on at this tip of the mountain, as Freamon puts it. So really, really good moments here. Right.
So what's next?
We do have a little break from the climax towards the end of the episode for a little dinner, a very short-lived dinner between McNulty and D'Agostino. So we'll deal with that in the next section. So McNulty meets D'Agostino for dinner. She claims she's there to renew their relationship, and then quickly begins to probe him for information about Hamsterdam and Colvin. Naughty, naughty. He sees through her feigned interest in him and walks out of the dinner.
So yeah, McNulty and he's able to use his detective skills, I guess, to realise that she's basically just pumping him for information.
I don't think you'd need. Yeah, you probably need too many detective skills for it. She's getting onto the subject very quickly, I guess. She clearly can't be spending too much time with the guy. But, yeah. It's a very different story to last time, treading very carefully. McNulty's really on his guard here, like nowhere else on the show, I think. And good for him. Shoving her off. This scene immediately follows the Stringer Avon departure scene. So obviously that's a very cautious dancing around important subjects scene as well. So I think that was a nice parallel they drew there as well.
And of course, it notes the fact that McNulty does seem to let down his guard a little bit when she mentions the sort of imminent sex, which does seem to obviously capture his attention somewhat. But he just catches back onto his original caution, based around the fact that she is very quickly making this all about some kind of information that he might have for her. Yeah. And, I think you're right. I think it's good for him to stand up for himself like that and kind of realise when he's getting played.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so...
And for some, all of a sudden, McNulty is the one with the principles and the kind of like, I'm not just going to have sex with you for such and such, All of a sudden, he seems like the well-adjusted one. Yeah, and
there's a real power to having that role, to playing that role, and it's so weird to see McNulty playing it. And it's obviously leading up to this big transition for him in season 4. The settling down.
That's right,
yeah. Yep, okay, so the final major cases unit. So the next day, the unit records Stringer talking to Shamrock. Shamrock mentions contract killers on the phone. Although Stringer notices his mistake, the unit have the evidence they have worked hard for. That's it. That's just a very short scene, but it's a very important and very emotion-heavy scene.
The two hitters, yeah.
Yeah. And
so this is a really kind of cathartic moment of seeing the detail and the major case unit like this. They finally, after all this time, heard the man they wanted to hear, and is also incriminating himself in the process. It's like all of their birthdays and Christmases come at once. Yeah. So I assume if he didn't say not on the phone, they could have claimed that hitters was not incriminating, but it's because he actively mentioned it was a conspiracy by saying not on the phone that he incriminated himself. I assume is that correct? Yeah, I mean, hitters in itself isn't a isn't a really problem. He could be talking about some guys that he wanted for his baseball team or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But because he's kind of clearly making it a bit of a conspiracy, that does give it away.
And that's great because that's exactly like in season 1 where Prez overlooked one of those situations. It's like they didn't talk about anything specific to drugs, and Freamon mentions how it's this conspiracy, this covering up of a conspiracy that really is the most pertinent information, and we see that this is now a routine bit of wiretapping for them that catches them with Stringer, yeah.
And then there's a nice little moment for McNulty and Daniels as they, meet up on the fact that they have worked together on this case, and for all of the dislike that they may have for one another, they can still realise that this is an important moment, and their hard work has paid off, and it's like a congratulations to one another, making a bit of reparations here. Yeah,
it certainly feels more noble than McNulty saying to Daniels, I told you so, this was the real target, and it paid off. Like, there's none of that.
Yeah.
However, there must be a feeling from Daniels that is kind of what McNulty thinks. I like to think it's a little bit more noble than that, but... yeah.
Especially seeing as McNulty has, we're talking about reform. McNulty is one of those characters who is making a bit of effort and does seem to be undergoing a little bit of a transformation.
Yeah. And
so it's nice to see him not sort of... It's not like he has to hold back from saying it. We don't see him suddenly sort of about to say it, or he pulls away. He genuinely seems to have a bit of humility about the situation.
Yeah, and I think as much as it is a success handshake, it's also a parting handshake. I think there's a sense that McNulty knows that his work is now done as far as this detail goes, as per their promise.
That's what Daniel said.
Yeah, so it's been that looming responsibility to find something else that has probably kept him on his toes, and probably improving himself, looking beyond the imminent sex, as you put it, for the past few episodes, and that will very shortly send him off to find Beatty next episode. So it makes sense for McNulty that now that he's reached the end of the case, as Stringer put it, and as we see next week, there really will be no grandstanding. There'll be no Jimmy McNulty badge. There will be a dead Stringer who doesn't know that he was ever convicted. So how's that for a kick in the teeth for Jimmy? And he is going to need to find something that will fill him up. And this is kind of McNulty, I guess, coming to terms with that, accepting that, shaking Daniels' hand and moving on to Beatty. So it's a really nice moment with a lot more to it than meets the eye, I think.
Especially based on what Freamon tells him about the job not saving him.
Yeah.
And he definitely has to learn that in the next episode where they discover what happens.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So there's an awful lot to come.
And said incident is presumably what we'll cover next.
Yep, that's right. Yep. So this is a scene that's going to deconstruct everything we saw in the previous scene where they caught Stringer. It's going to make their efforts completely worthless. But I guess ultimately the goal is the same. There is now Stringer off the streets, but Stringer was never going to cause any particular harm anyway. So yeah, it's tricky, but let's move on to it.
He's still enabling it, he was being shut out of it. But if it weren't for all of his driving a bit of a wedge between the two of them and going their different ways and having a very different viewpoint, he was still enabling financially a large drug organisation.
That's true. Can't be overlooked. So Stringer's fate. So when Stringer arrives at the development site, Omar and Brother Mouzone are waiting for him. They burst into his meeting with Andy Krawczyk and kill his bodyguard. Stringer tries to run, fleeing up the staircase. Krawczyk cowers away from Omar, who simply walks after Bell. Bell is trapped between Omar and Mouzone and tells them that he is now clean and offers them money to let him go. Omar tells Stringer that Avon gave him up because of his duplicity. Stringer admits there is nothing he can say, and as he asks them to get on with it, at which point they open fire. Outside the window of the floor where Stringer is killed is a sign for B&B Enterprises. Oh.
Yeah, this is a really kind of incredible scene of events. It starts off with Omar and Brother Mouzone outside. I still am a bit skeptical of their complete lack of subtlety and why they are just stood there. They're not exactly inconspicuous characters, aren't they? There's Omar with his big duster and Brother Mouzone with like tuxedo and bow tie, and I mean they just stick out like a sore thumb, and they're not like hiding around a corner or discussing in some alley. They're just stood out in the middle of the street, and there's people just walking and cycling past, and they must look kind of strange to the people around them, surely. Like,
yeah, I guess
that's a bit odd. So it's a bit of a strange opening.
Yeah, little shades of the opening of the original episode. Yeah,
it's tying that together, isn't it? This sort of unlikely double act.
Yeah, so very, very weird. So I guess they walk in, and Stringer very aggressively probes Krawczyk about Clay Davis just to see if he's involved as well, I guess. And then obviously Omar rushes in and does the dirty to Stringer's bodyguard, who's probably a very much an Avon loyalist, so an Avon loss for him there. And then there's a weird moment where he tries to work out if Krawczyk is in the game or not, I think, where Krawczyk is literally just sort of bawling his eyes out on the floor, not knowing what's going on. And Omar, he has this code where he has to kill people only that are in the game, and whether Krawczyk is in the game or not is a very contentious issue. It's very morally grey, I think, to try and answer that question. But he ultimately chooses to spare him based on his reaction, I guess. Yeah, despite everything, I don't think Omar, especially with the audience, wouldn't have really got away with it if he was going to start shooting this guy who's just cowering and clearly is not interested in getting involved in any combat or anything like that. And I'm sure Omar knows people in the game well enough to know that anyone in that situation, anyone who's willing to put that much on the line, they seem to accept death with a lot more comfort or a lot more kind of dignity, perhaps. Yeah.
Whereas someone like Krawczyk, who is more or less not a citizen in that same sense as the way as Omar describes them, but you know, he's not a rough and tumble criminal. He's not out there on the street, so it wouldn't feel right for Omar to kill him here.
Yeah. And,
I mean, it wouldn't. I mean, I say right, but you know what I mean, like in terms of his character.
Yeah, I guess it would be a breach of his code, wouldn't it? Even if he is involved in some sort of proximity of the drug trade, there is no, you know, there's no violent, real violent streak to him, and it's weird to see how a non-street character really responds to violence. I think it's one of the only times we see a character who isn't hardened or desensitized to violence actually respond to death. And it really is a real, you know, traumatic affair for him.
There's just so many little signals in this selection of scenes, just calling all of these little moments in Stringer's life and everything that we've seen so far. I mean, we've mentioned on so many different occasions, and now we finally get our payoff about Stringer saying, shut that door, lock that door. It's kind of this ongoing thing where he's always telling characters to shut doors and lock doors and keep things secure. And then this ends up being his very downfall. He's running around this place and all he finds are locked doors and places that he can't get out. And it's just it's really a dedication of the show to spend that amount of time building up just this tiny little phrase that adds up to a small factor of his death at the end. That's the level of detail and commitment that this show is prepared to go to the lengths for.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess Stringer chose to conduct their meeting in this secure location, and again, his caution, is it his caution that's his downfall? Is it saying that it's bad to be cautious? Maybe it's not really saying anything, it's just saying that Stringer's...
Just saying that any kind of act that may seem like an act of caution, an act of security that seems like it's there to protect you, just a small twist of fate could turn it entirely against you. It's just talking about almost like the notion of what is good for you and what is bad for you can be totally twisted against you.
So I guess
entirely out of your control. Like it's just about the arbitrary sense that there is no. It ties into the whole there is no right and wrong. I suppose.
Yeah,
it's trying to go for that grey, ambiguous element that all these decisions you think that you can make to protect you, they just might turn against you. You know, just because sometimes sod's law. You know.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I guess that so they kind of, the doors perhaps represent all of his bad decisions, his stupid choices over the years, coming back to haunt him. Then,
how he's getting shut out of the Barksdale organisation. He's come up against nothing but a closed door with Clay Davis. He's basically just been posting money through the letterbox, and nobody's been opening the door.
Yeah. So that's cool. So he eventually makes it up to the top floor where there's a bunch of flying birds that look a bit like doves. They don't look very pigeony, but there's a few birds that flap their wings.
I mean, that's got to be a Marlowe thing, surely.
Yeah,
that's got to be a relation to Marlowe's birds.
That's true. That's true.
It's got to be. I mean, it's almost like it is like a sort of an old Western film or something like that, with someone running somewhere and the birds flying away and giving away someone's position, you know. But it also ties into the fact that Marlowe has his little coop, doesn't he? I'm not sure what kind of birds they are. I mean, it almost doesn't really matter if they're not the same breed or anything like that. That was what I saw. I was just like, that's just Marlowe is here in spirit. All of these problems weighing against him, obviously after the meeting that he had with Marlowe, thinking that he could outsmart him there and that he could persuade him. You know, it's just another piece of the puzzle coming together right at the very end.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, really, really good. Definitely.
I really like the close-ups of his face as well. Lots of those close-ups of Stringer's face right at the very end.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously he runs into Mouzone first as he gets up the stairs after the birds, almost sort of blocking him out of heaven right at the top of the building. So yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. And Stringer leans onto the money, the financial incentive as his way out. That's his interpretation of power and the ability to persuade people, and it doesn't satisfy anyone here. It's all about the revenge and the personal element. So yeah, it's great how Omar gets to stick it to him. Avon gave you up. We didn't have to torch his ass neither. It's such a fantastic way of getting it back to what the root of the animosity was, or the anger was. Sorry, the torturing of of Brandon and the death of Brandon. And it's easy to forget that that's where this all started, considering it was so long ago. And it's nice that Omar can find a way to really cut it where it's most satisfying for him,
without having to do the whole "this is for Brandon."
Yeah, exactly. It's a really, really nice, really sort of jibey way of putting it to him. So, yeah, and then they just
And then there's the whole. His line is like an exact copy of what Poot says when Wallace gets killed. There's the whole we'll get on with it, motherfucker, and then that's when they shoot, sort of thing. Like,
yeah,
that's a little trick that's been used before.
And they use it again for Colvin and all sorts. So
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a lot of silence before that moment. There's Stringer contemplating what he can do at this point, and there really is nothing. That his money won't save him. His one source of power and dreams. It's just got to cut his losses at this point.
And just before that, there's also a shot from outside the room that they're in where we kind of hear them talking. We hear Stringer saying, I ain't into all that anymore. I'm not into that gangster bullshit or whatever. And we hear it as though we are outside the room. It's almost like we're in this adjoining room, hearing what's going on from far away. It really does create a sense of the camera as a witness. I mean, it's something that's a really important part of the show in general. Is this voyeuristic kind of? We're seeing things from cameras. We're seeing things as there's a lot of peeking around corners that a lot of shots do. And this is just another really good example. And because the scene is so powerful, it just adds up. The camera as a witness in this scene, seeing it from afar, and Stringer's desperate pleas from outside the room, and then we are brought inside, and then in contrary to that, we're then brought very close to his face. You kind of get this big close-ups of this realization that there's nothing he can do. He can't bargain with these people, like you said. He's not able to use that kind of power here.
Yep, and we then get it's a dual shooting, a very Poot and Bodie-esque in terms of Wallace, and Mouzone making those first hits with his Walther, and then Omar just smashing the shotty out and finishing off the job. So, pretty violent stuff. Cut off before he's allowed to be heard. Then they go over to inspect the body very slowly.
They're not in a hurry to get out.
No, they're staying true to their kind of otherworldly character stance, and I like as they go to inspect it. We don't get to inspect Stringer ourselves, but we do get to go and inspect the billboard across the road where the Barksdale and Bell, I guess the B&B, is never confirmed if that's what it stands for, but I guess that was perhaps the company name he gave it before there was any real establishment of anger between the two of them, or a rift between them. Perhaps early when Avon was in prison. I guess that's perhaps referring to the loss of their relationship and what they used to be like. And a really kind of really awesome ending shot for an episode. And it's great how just as the episode finishes, we see a train appear to collide with the poster. It sort of comes just along the bottom of the poster. We see the pantograph line as it comes by. And that's obviously Mouzone's odd slow train metaphor coming to a close there. So that was really, really nice.
Yeah, there's just so many things in that scene. Just all these little moments and everything that's been happening to build up to this point. They just bring out all of their big guns at once.
Yeah, definitely.
And not just literally. Things that they were talking about their guns earlier on.
That's true. Yep, just all the big guns for now, all the big weapons.
But yeah, it's absolutely stunning, and just a really, really amazing end to an episode. One of the best finales in any TV show. In any sort of single episode of TV, it's got to be one of the best because it just. But again, like I was saying before, its context is so important. It's because of everything that's happened before and understanding all of these little mentions and references. If you saw that scene out of context, having never watched The Wire before, you wouldn't seem all that remarkable, I would think. I mean, You'd be able to recognise high quality performances and kind of interesting characters, obviously with a bit of depth to them, but without all of that context and everything that you've seen before, it's meaningless. So.
Yeah.
And that's just The Wire all over it, isn't it? It's rewarding that kind of slow build, that just creating all of these important pieces, assembling the puzzle, and then finally taking a step back and revealing all. And as is also appropriate with George Pelecanos, it's in that penultimate episode that we get all of these major incidents, and then our final episode is sort of wrapping up, winding down, getting ready to move on. Although I believe in season 3 there was kind of more of a sense that they weren't sure if there was going to be a season 4. Wasn't there a big gap between season 3 and 4?
Yeah, I know that was when the show was literally hanging up by a thread, yeah. And then I think the 5th season came a lot easier. Sort of HBO said, "Fuck it, it doesn't make money, but we love this show, and we're gonna give them a 5th season." But yeah, I believe there was a real threat at this point, that there just wasn't any point in continuing, which is weird because there doesn't really seem to have been any indication from the way the show's been produced that there is a closure. I mean, it would work as closure, but there's so many characters that are continuing their arcs, like, you know. McNulty's certainly going somewhere new, and season 5 obviously has a much more conclusive feel to it. That they really knew that was going to be the end. So it's nice how ballsy they were in terms of keeping things open, because there was a possibility of that next season, even if there wouldn't have been one and it would have hurt the show a bit. It was probably worth the risk. So yeah, it's cool to see.
So that's it. That's Middle Ground. That's all of our recap, I believe.
Yeah, man, we're through it all. As always, it takes us about 2 hours, which is surprising considering how dense this episode was. It's quite good for us, I guess. Should we do our four sections?
God damn it. Yeah, forget about that for a while, man. You know, just dream with me. We ain't got a dream no more, man. We got real shit. Real estate. We can touch.
What did you make of the title, Middle Ground?
I mean, most obviously, it's actually quoted by Royce himself, trying to find that middle ground between using the information that they found about Hamsterdam, the drop in crime, how he can use it to, you know, be somewhat selfish and protect their department, and try and make it palatable to those that can exert pressure on them. But also, it's seeing how he may have good intentions, and he can see that there's a positive spin on this, and that there is a good reason to court an otherwise controversial idea. And that's the middle ground of The Wire overall, is seeing a lot of these characters in these situations where we can both loathe them and love them for various reasons. So I guess in some sense it's telling of the show as a whole. But it's very explicitly stated here by Royce about the whole idea of Hamsterdam being this difficult middle ground.
Mm. Oh, definitely.
And then there's, I guess, Omar and Brother Mouzone reach a middle ground as well. They have a common enemy.
Yep, that's true. That's true. They can see past their own problems with each other to focus on this larger enemy. Also, Mouzone himself, who would be able to reopen business friendship with Avon for a non-monetary compromise in the form of Stringer's death. They discussed that one. D'Agostino as well, who gets back with someone she doesn't like to find politically expedient information. Stringer getting Avon arrested to continue being a legitimate, or attempting to be a legitimate businessman. Yeah.
Is it too much to say that Stringer was caught in the middle ground? Because he catches Brother Mouzone coming down from above, and Omar comes up from below.
Oh, very nice.
So yep. He's caught in the middle.
You can certainly have that one, absolutely. I guess you could say it's possibly slightly ironic as a title when you consider that a lot of the plot lines are, as Freeman says, at the top of the mountain. There's this big climax, and we're just apparently stuck here in the middle ground. That's perhaps stretching a little bit more, but yeah, there's a few ways you could interpret this one. It's quite a nice open title.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's just very telling of the show as a whole, about this ambiguous middle ground, this difficult place where good and evil kind of become a bit meaningless, and it's more about the effects that it's having, the consequences, the context,
Yeah.
people's agendas, and the like.
So we also had an epigraph this episode, as we always do, from the man himself, Stringer, his only epigraph. And in this sense, it actually is an epigraph because it kind of underlines his death, as an epigraph does. We ain't got a dream no more, man. So obviously, I think most obviously that is just him explaining how, with the right intentions, they have all they need to live a dream, as far as Stringer wants them to live a dream. But I guess there's also an element of imminent death about it. We're gonna die, announcing the end of both the Barksdales. So it's, I think, perhaps works on both those levels.
That and kind of like you say, it's funny that he should be talking about how great their empire is and that they've got all of this real shit, and now as a result they don't have to dream anymore, when this literally marks the end of the Barksdales. So
Yeah.
it's a bit ironic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, overall, it's not a particularly kind of interesting line, but it certainly underlines Stringer, and it's nice that they use Stringer as the death character epigraph, which they do on a few occasions. Any good scenes that you enjoyed this episode, Alex?
Any good scenes?
Any good
all
scenes?
The scenes.
Any not good scenes?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's really obvious, but we've got to go for that final scene. We've got to go for the balcony scene, and we've already said, much there. What more is there to say about those scenes that we haven't already mentioned? Just a stunning performance. It's really well executed, beautifully shot, great use of audio or lack of audio in the case of those sort of wonderful silences in the final scene. I would also say that I really liked the scene with the community, the little community meeting that they had.
Yeah.
That was just so lucid. It was so real. It was like it's one of those moments when The Wire really does become this documentary style, and these sort of seamless performances by people that have got to be actual Baltimore residents, just talking about the way things actually are, because it's very genuine performance, and these people connecting after seeing some positive police work at last. We're actually seeing the result on the community of some good being done by the police more often than not. It's constantly the police are talked about by the non-police members in a negative manner. So it's finally something the police is doing is having a positive impact on somebody.
Yeah.
That in itself makes it a cathartic scene.
Yeah, definitely. It told a story that was much bigger than the show itself. Definitely in that one. I should have put that in my list as well. Actually, I mean, every scene after scene of greatness, but there were a few that were in a different league. I think Barksdale and Bell in the warehouse, Barksdale and Bell on the balcony, Stringer's fate. Those three, I think, were topping everything else that was in the episode. Not put down anything else in the episode. All of it was fantastic, particularly the stuff with Carcetti and Colvin, as we mentioned. But yeah, really.
The two more that I was going to mention was the Hamsterdam scene with Carcetti and Colvin. It's a very short little bit, but just really powerful. Just no need to show us Hamsterdam. We just see Carcetti's response to it, which is a great choice. And also, the other one was with Levy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that as well. I mean, I really like Levy, so. But he's just really good in the scene. He really cuts Stringer down to size, and just the setting. Again, we've talked about the choices of shot there. It's just really nice, this crushing realization on Stringer. It's like the final, in a sense, it's like the final connection that goes wrong, because by the time he goes back and he's by the time he goes back to Avon and he's talking about trying to kill Clay Davis, it feels like the connection there has already been severed. He's so shut out of his own organisation that the very people they're supposed to be protecting him and being the gatekeepers and whatnot, they don't even seem to want him there anymore. So that is like the real kind of severance that he has with what's going on with the politics and the rest of his life. So, and then that switch is flipped and he just seems to lose it. He just seems to abandon all rationality and is now trying to get someone like Slim Charles to murder a state senator, which is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I guess that's what's good. Really, it's there's so much positivity in the episode, considering how depressing some of them can be. That the heaviest hitting ones are often, the most positive and satisfying ones. We have the major success in the detail, Colvin getting finally to show off the positives of his Hamsterdam, and the community's reactions, and also, obviously Stringer Bell dying is a big tragedy, particularly for a first-time viewer. But in many ways, he was saved by his death. If he did not die here, he would have been arrested within hours. Following what the detail found, he would have been sent to prison for I don't know how long, but a long, long time. He wouldn't really have any friends left on the street, as they'd have all turned to Avon. I don't think things would have been particularly pretty for him in prison. And in many ways, it was perhaps better that he clocked out, having done his reform attempt on the street.
Yeah. So anything else about the episode in general that you want to say?
Obviously we didn't mention the characters, but I guess it's pretty clear. There were 3 standouts for me, really. Those being Stringer, Avon, and Omar. But, I guess we've pretty much gone over all the things.
It's one of those episodes where it's so geared towards particular characters that it's just a bit of a... It's not so much of an ensemble piece, although there is obviously loads and loads of characters in it. It's just so geared towards what's going on with Stringer and Avon in particular. And then we have Avon, we have Omar even finally getting his getting the revenge. There's loads of good stuff going on with the detail, and there's nice appearance by Levy, obviously. But it's all about Avon and Stringer in this episode. Really, it's just 2 amazing performances, and Wood Harris especially.
Yeah, I do
He's
agree
just
with you.
so good as Avon.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, we have a finale to go. A bonus. I think it's a little bit longer than the other episodes, isn't it? So, oh dear.
Can't believe this is our 3rd finale.
Yeah, absolutely.
The week after this, we will be starting season 4.
Yep, and
Absolute nuts.
I think give it a couple more weeks and we'll be at our year mark for when we started the podcast. So
That's true, yeah.
Just starting season 4 in time for our little anniversary.
To pay our bandwidth bill.
Bills mount up at the end of the year.
Yeah. I guess that's it then.
Yeah.
In terms of more general things about the show, about this episode as a whole, I was going to quickly mention that it's very powerful not to show the effect on the major case unit of Stringer's death. It doesn't obviously stray into that. It just leaves us with his death, which kind of brings us into the sudden what they obviously all learn the day after or the hours after. With the major case unit, what they discover. So that's a powerful point that's left into the next episode, and rightly so.
Yeah, they certainly don't belittle Stringer's death by making that what the end of the episode is. Definitely, it's good that they have that extra episode to make that point elsewhere. Yeah. And
also mentioned Pelikanos, the principal writer of this episode. There's a really good. I think I'll post a link to it on the blog for this episode. There's a really, really good interview with him that he does with Alan Sepinwall, the guy from What's Alan Watching. He does a little interview with him, and he talks about writing this episode, and he talks about how he's a big fan of Westerns, and that definitely comes through with how he's worked with the editors on this, because there's a lot of close-ups of people's faces, and there's like the birds flying away. That's very much a Western thing. We literally start with a standoff. So yeah, there's a lot of Western films influence on this episode, I feel. Yeah, definitely with the birds flying away as well, as we mentioned. Yeah, it all comes in. So yeah, that's it. We'll come back next week for the finale, season 3. Can't believe that we're going to be doing it. It will be mission accomplished for season 3.
Yeah.
So please join us next week for that. I'm sure it'll be a very special episode where we'll be rounding things off and saying goodbye and saying hello to just another season. We got 2 more to go after that. It's crazy that it's really catching up with us. We're going to have to find out what we're going to do with ourselves once it's going over. But I digress. It's not time for that yet.
The podcast won't fill us up.
Yeah, it will not save you.
Yeah.
So yeah, please join us. Please join us next week. Feel free to send us any comments or questions or anything that you think that we're totally wrong on about this episode and any of the others to caughtonthewire@gmail.com or via the contact form on the website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And you can also get all of the other episodes from season 1 and 2 on the website as well, or visit the YouTube link, which is there also. So until next week for our final, thanks very much for joining us, and take care.